All right. I think we are live finally. Sorry about that.
Okay. You're
So
good.
we're going to have a talk. It's going to be, if I understand the topic, is it sexuality between Islam and Christianity? Is that what it is? Is that the right topic?
hmm Yes, sir.
Okay, gotcha. Just give me one second. Pull up my little stock back. I'll just start with a 5-minute introduction because we'll start with Christianity first, if
Okay.
that's okay.
hmm
And I got my little watch thing here,
Yeah.
and we'll just keep our own time. So I'll start with 5 minutes. And I will talk about specifically with regarding to sexuality, the private parts, which is probably the main part of sexuality. Islam and Christianity has a lot to say about that.
hmm
And what we now, and so basically, the Old Testament, it made an obligation to be circumcised. The New Testament did away with that obligation, which I'm pretty, assume you know. Islam came 600 years later and reimposed this obligation of circumcision. Well, we now know from modern science that circumcision actually protects people from AIDS. In fact, let me share my screen real quick here, and I'll show you the scientific research which establishes that. And actually, if I can find it, so the question is this: we the issue here that there's no doubt about it that the New Testament caused people to get AIDS by removing the obligation of circumcision. Then Muhammad comes 600 years later, reimposes this obligation, and thus people get saved from AIDS. So the impact of this actually, um, you could look at South Africa. If you look at in South Africa, it's overwhelming majority Christian. Well, we now know that 25% of Africans suffer. They suffer from they're HIV positive, as compared with not even 1% of the Islamic world. If you look at North Africa, a big part of this, I mean, is circumcision. Now, how many people did the New Testament give AIDS to? I don't know. It's very hard to calculate those numbers because remember, the New Testament removed the obligation of circumcision. So let me just share my screen if I am able to. Uh, slide share screen. Oh no, don't make me give permissions. Okay, let me know if you can see this. Can you see my screen?
I can. Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful. So now they're reimposing there's a voluntary circumcision program in South Africa. In 2007, a voluntary medical male circumcision was endorsed by the WHO and Joint United program on HIV and AIDS after it was found to be associated with approximately 60% reduction in the risk for female to male transmission of HIV. So they're basically showing the goodness of of a circumcision. So now let's put this into AI and let us see. I gave AI these two options. If Islam is false and it's from the devil, let's just assume that. So here, I asked AI, from the two options, please choose one which makes most sense. God made a rule, then God did away with it, causing a catastrophe. Then Satan, if we are to assume Islam is from Satan, reimposed this good rule, saving millions of children, millions of people. Or option number two, God made a rule and Satan did away with it, which in this case was the Apostle Paul, causing a catastrophe. Then God reimposed his good rule, saving the lives of millions of people. Is that really hard to see? Let me make it a little bit bigger for you. So let's see which one option two makes the most sense. Look at the AI, some very good points they've raised. They say God made a rule generally seen as wise and beneficial. Satan does away with it, often depicted as the deceiver, bringing harm and chaos, which is exactly what Apostle Paul did. A catastrophe follows. Expected results of rejecting the divine wisdom. Right, the divine wisdom was to be circumcised. God reimposes a rule, restoring order, justice, and saving lives. So when Islam came and reimposed circumcision, that makes the most sense. This aligns with common religious themes where God's law brings order, Satan's interference brings destruction, which is what Apostle Paul did. And God restoration brings salvation. Okay, so that option number 2 makes the most sense. So AI is clearly, once again, pointing out that Islam is the true religion. Go ahead, that's my 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. And I actually think I responded to this in a comment that you and I went back and forth on YouTube. So first I want to say God didn't actually do away with circumcision. He did away with any barriers to getting to him. So if we actually look at Galatians, so this was my response to the comment. And I just want to be clear, I'm not coming from this as a Muslim scholar. I'm not claiming to be a Muslim scholar, I'm not claiming to be a scientist, but as a Christian who does have advanced degrees in biblical studies, that's the vantage point. And so to respond, I do think it's a significant problem that AIDS is a huge problem. I hate that. I hate that reality. But this is what I responded to your comment on YouTube with, was that circumcision can decrease potential transmission, which is absolutely true. Paul was arguing that the physical act of the removal of the foreskin does not make one right with God. That is the key issue. And again, personally, I'm circumcised. Most Western Christians I know that are males are circumcised. I'm not running around getting, statistics on that. However, that is not something that I have to do in order to become a Christian. But again, that is a personal perspective or a personal choice on the matter. That's what he's really saying. It's a personal choice whether someone wants to be circumcised or not. But it doesn't make us right with God. And some religious teachers claimed that Gentile Christian men must face the removal of foreskin to be right with God. So Paul refuted that, emphasizing faith in Christ as the basis for right standing before God. So that's what Galatians 5 states. And so Paul is not forbidding the practice, but clearly articulating that it's not a spiritual benefit if you are counting on circumcision to make you right with God. That's a direct quote from Galatians 5. So when we consider the sexual teachings of Paul and even the Christian sexual ethic, celibacy is expected unless one is in a monogamous marital relationship. So that would negate any issue of AIDS within Christian couples, because if Christian men are being celibate, if they are actual Christian men that are devout and practicing, they would be celibate, or they would be in a monogamous marital relationship, which would negate the factor of the transmission of AIDS. And AIDS arguably didn't become as problematic until the 1980s, from what I understand. And I could be wrong, but I think that would be the thing that I would posit in response. So I would say that, and also I would say to connect Paul with Satan is that is I guess we'd have to do a comparison on the nature of Satan and the character of Paul and try to get to that point. But as far as saying that, I can understand the link where you would say Satan used Paul to do that. However, Paul was not saying not to get circumcised. He was just saying that you don't have to in order to be right with God. So, and it's also in the context of understanding celibacy and monogamy. So those are the two things that I would say. And that would be my presentation. So I'm sorry, I refuted instead of actually making a presentation. I did a refutation. But my basis for presentation that I would have would be monogamy and celibacy, as well as kind of the different dynamics between Christianity and that of Islam in regards to those things.
Okay. So, yeah, I guess we could start a little discussion here. You do accept, it's a kind of an undeniable fact that the New Testament did away with the obligation of circumcision. Is that clear?
Right. Like I said, it's not obligatory in right standing with God, but it is a matter of conscience if someone would choose that.
And actually,
but it's not an imposition by leaders.
Okay, so we accept it. So that's why these Christian men are not circumcised, because it doesn't really have any value anymore in Christianity. That's what's causing the problem here. If God knew, if Paul was really an apostle from God and he was receiving God's messages, a revelation from God, he would know the importance of circumcision, right?
Well, and again, I think obviously God is sovereign, so he would know exactly what Paul would write. Again, I think it's more a moral issue of standing on, it's more of a moral standing as opposed to a clinical issue. So we're conflating two things. One is moral, one is clinical. And so again, from a moral perspective, standing before God, circumcision was abolished. From a clinical issue, the Bible doesn't address that. So that's what I would say.
Well, it should, because this is a huge issue. I mean, when you're saying, "Oh, the Bible just didn't really address these issues," that's the problem. How is it you didn't know about these? I mean, you got to know about the science, the morality, and all these things about these laws that you're imposing or reimposing or doing away with. That's the problem. I mean, just saying, "Well, the Bible really didn't care about these things." That's not a very good explanation here. Okay,
well, I would turn it and say, if we're talking about clinical issues, then does the Quran or the Hadiths address hormone replacement therapy, or does it address transgenderism as far as gender affirmation surgery? So, I mean, it's one of those things that we conflate those things. That obviously, the issue of transgenderism was still present in ancient worlds, like we know that, but the modern clinical issues.
Yeah, let's first figure out exactly what the Bible teaches. Here, Paul says, "I am telling you that if you let yourself be circumcised, Christ will be of no benefit to you." He accused circumcision advocates of wanting to make a good showing in flesh. So basically, it actually discourages people from getting circumcised, as you could see from the text over here. So now, again, the AI has already done the homework. Where did the AI go wrong here? Can you explain? Can you see it? Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger for you. So the two options, I think the AI did a very beautiful job in which it picks the right choice here. So let's look at the two options here. If God, let us assume Muhammad is not from God. So God made a rule, which is circumcision. Then God did away with it, which is Apostle Paul, causing this catastrophe. Then Satan reimposes his good rule, saving the lives of millions of people. That means Prophet Muhammad comes, he reimposes the circumcision, and now look at Africa, look at North Africa, Morocco, for example, 0.1%, not even 1%, as compared to 25% of Christian South Africa, who have people who have AIDS. The AI is already, choosing the option here. That option number one doesn't make sense. Or number two makes sense. God made a rule, then Satan did away with it, causing the catastrophe. That makes sense, dude. Then God reimposes his rule with Prophet Muhammad and saves the lives of millions of people. My question to you is, why are you saying option two doesn't make sense?
Okay, so again, for context, because I think that's really important. So if I may share my screen.
Oh, sure. Sure.
I'm going to pull up this passage. So in context, because this is what we're talking about here. So Christ has truly set us free, and make sure that you stay free and don't get tied up in slavery to the law. Paul, I tell you this, if you're counting on circumcision to make you right with God, Christ will be of no benefit to you. I say it again, if you're trying to find favor with God by being circumcised, you must obey every regulation in the whole law of Moses. If you're trying to make yourselves right with God by keeping the law, you've been cut off from Christ. You have fallen away from God's grace. But those who live by the Spirit eagerly wait to receive by faith the righteousness God has promised to us. So when we place our faith in Christ Jesus, there's no benefit in being circumcised or being uncircumcised. What is important is faith expressing itself in love. So again, I'm going back to saying that this is not a matter of, again, I'm distinguishing between a moral claim and a clinical claim. This is a moral claim of Scripture of saying one is not right with God because if they're counting on circumcision to make them right with God, it's not going to have any benefit to them. Again, this is an issue that when we talk about AIDS, that is a modern issue. It came to prominence in the 1980s. I was not alive to see this, but I have seen the literature. I've heard about the events that raised awareness, especially in Africa. However, again, this is I would say that to equate Paul with Satan, because he is saying that it doesn't mean, so I would almost shift things around and ask, what would, if there was a procedure, actually, I'll
Well,
step
let me
back
ask you
a
this
bit.
question. I don't
Okay.
understand your objection here. I don't understand. I mean, you're just giving a lot of information, but how does I'm trying to understand how this addresses the AI refutation. How does this address the question you're being asked? My question to you is, how do you where did the Chat GPT go wrong? That's my question to you. I don't understand.
Okay. So if we want to, we can go to ChatGPT or Gemini right now, and again, I can share my screen. We can pull up AI. Again, that's an appeal. Could be seen as an argument from authority, which I don't think AI is an authority.
Okay, here, let's
But
do this together. I'm gonna share my screen, okay?
absolutely. Yep.
So we're gonna feed ChatGPT
Sorry.
your explanation, and you can show why option 2 is not the right option. And so that's what you got to defend here. Okay, so let's go here. Blah 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 blah. Circumcision and religion. Share. Okay, so I've pretty much fed in the 2 questions. Option 1 has problems, which is what Christianity is proposing. Options 2 strengths. So it chooses the second option. So some defenders of option 1 say, now help me fill in the blanks. How do you defend this? You can see my screen, right?
Yeah, sorry, I have to get really close to the screen.
Okay, I'm
says
gonna
it
be
keeps God.
I'm gonna be your Vanna White. You know who Vanna White is, right?
I do.
I'm gonna type everything you say, and what's your defense of option 1?
Okay, so it says option 2 keeps God as the consistent source of good and beneficial laws. I agree with that. Satan is removing a good. Okay. So again, contextually, the issue I have is we are oversimplifying and making generalizations with these 2 things. We're
What
saying God and Satan.
generalization? Be specific.
Okay, so we are conflating Paul with Satan, right? And we're generalizing saying, well, if God says this, we should do that. And if Satan says not to do that, obviously it's opposing God, right? Well, you can do that with the whole of the Quran, you can do that with the whole of the Bible.
Wait a
So
second.
if we're going to be
I'm so confused.
That's okay.
What? So I don't know if I guess I'm not understanding where you're coming from. I'm literally, can you, I mean, in a sentence, can you explain why option 1 is wrong?
Okay. So if we're incredibly specific, I'm going to go back to what I had said before because I have it pulled up. And
First of all, you need to understand by removing the obligation of circumcision, that removed the protection from Christians, thus causing AIDS. So now you got to defend that. And then a false prophet comes, allegedly, and reimposes that obligation, saving these millions of people. And you need to defend that. How does that make sense? That's what you need to be answering.
Okay. So in the context, again, Paul is talking about a moral issue. People were saying that in order to be right with God, one must be circumcised. However, if we're looking at the whole of Paul's teaching, he also teaches Christian celibacy and marital monogamy. Those are the only 2 acceptable sexual practices for Christians. So it's a mute point when we say that when he basically is negating the obligation of circumcision with right standing before God, the problem is solved by Christian sexual ethic that he teaches, which is celibacy until marriage and marital monogamy and faithfulness in that. Okay, that's how we rectify that.
Okay, here's what I'm gonna feed ChatGPT to see if what you're saying makes sense. Okay, so God was only referring to the focusing on the moral issue, and didn't care about the scientific benefits.
So, if I may, I would say that
on the moral issue and not concerned about the scientific benefits, right?
I wouldn't say not concerned about I would say that this is more of a moral claim as opposed to a scientific one. That's what I would say.
So that means he doesn't care about the science behind it.
I don't think it doesn't care. It's saying, but this particular issue, for that time, for that place, for that situation, it is a moral right standing before God, as opposed to talking about a pandemic that would happen in the 1980s.
Okay, he's not concerned about the scientific problems that would be caused in the 80s.
Sure.
which is actually today, not just the 80s, is in South Africa.
Okay, we'll just say we'll say in the
today's
20th and 21st century.
time. However, then how do you explain Satan correcting? So that's part of the question. So now Muhammad, if we were to assume he's a false prophet, how do you explain that Satan comes and is apparently concerned about these things? What's your explanation for that?
And like I said, if we're
the
okay.
fact that Satan saved these people from AIDS by reimposing the obligation. Reimposing the obligation. How do you explain that one?
Again, I would say that if we're going to get to the very core of the issue, so again, one issue is context. If we look at Paul and his teachings, not just on circumcision, but sexuality as a whole, this is a moot point. Secondly, we also see that when we get to authority and sources of authority, we're going to have distinct differences there. And so to say that Paul is Satan or that the Quran is Satan, we can have that discussion. But again, I think we're conflating this one issue with a bigger issue of source of authority and teaching.
I don't understand. Are you saying don't look at Muhammad as the satanic prophet? But if he's any false prophet is a satanic prophet, so that doesn't make sense.
Well, we will agree on that, right? We both agree on that.
Okay, so I don't understand. I guess I can't even agree or disagree because I don't understand what you're saying.
Right.
What
I'm saying is Satan is not saving Satan himself. If we were to agree that Satan himself is a person, I'm not saying that Muhammad is Satan in the flesh. That's not what I'm saying. But
a force of evil.
Okay, but the statement that you're making is saying that Satan personified is saving people from reimposing his obligations. So you're saying Muhammad himself is like what you are personifying in this scenario, Muhammad as Satan himself. And so I'm
some kind of satanic agent. It doesn't have to be Satan himself.
Okay. I think that there are multiple problems here. And so to fully get to the source of this or the core of this, we have to look at two different issues, either talking about circumcision and what the Bible says about that and the teaching, which again, I'm going to continue to argue that if we look at the teaching as a whole in context is not a problem, because if you are a true follower of Christ, you are going to, whether you're circumcised or not, you are going to remain celibate until marriage and you will stay faithful in marriage. And so, and again, how can an STI be transferred?
Okay, so let me add that to the text because I didn't write it down. Okay. So what you're saying here, God's expectation is you be celibate, which is also what Islam teaches.
Right.
Did I write that you be celibate, and therefore no need for that foreskin. Oh, no need for circumcision. No need for circumcision. Okay. And the fact that Satan, who also expects the same, actually level more, at least the same, expects the same celibacy, saved these people from AIDS by reimposing the obligation of
I don't want to be overly complicated here. However, I do have problems with this because, again,
explained by. Okay, so help me fill out the blanks. Right. I don't understand.
Right. So my thing here is I don't think that Satan actually expects celibacy. If you look at our culture today, I would say that our culture is satanic.
No. Islam, if we are to assume, is from God. From Satan. Even if it's from Satan, celibacy is a mandatory practice of Islam. You cannot go out and sleep with 1 million prostitutes. You cannot have sex outside of marriage. That's a part of Islam. So yes, we have to assume that.
So if I were writing this, I'd say Paul was focusing on the moral issue, not concerned about scientific problems in today's time. Paul's expectation is that celibacy would therefore uh, uh,
Is
celibacy
enough.
and expectation is to be celibate, therefore no need for circumcision. Correct. And I would say that instead of saying Satan or God, I would say that the fact is that also Islam teaches or expects, or Muhammad expects the same celibacy, save people from AIDS, but reimposes. I would, again, instead of challenging, anyways, that's fine. You can run with that. That's fine.
Okay, how do you explain this part that he reimposes, thus saving all these people? How? Give me an explanation.
Again, I go back to, and I'm having, like I said, the first part of that, I think celibacy negates circumcision.
No, I'm talking about why would Satan reimpose circumcision, saving all these millions of people from AIDS? Why would he do that? How can you explain that?
I would say, well, why does Satan wants people to kill each other? I mean, there's so many things that Satan would want. I mean, okay, so again, if we're looking at the difference between Islam and Christianity, Christianity at its core and historically is pacifistic. So we wouldn't pick up the sword to settle disputes, but why would, again, if we're comparing historical roots, why would Islam say that we need to impose a jizya, or why would we have conquests? I'm just saying, if we're talking about Satan and God and all of these things, why is death better than life? Again, if we're going to turn tables, I'm just saying there is, and maybe I'm just coming out of left field, but I would,
So you
again,
could say it's a mystery, can be explained by mystery.
I wouldn't say it's explained by mystery. Circumcision can be, okay. So the fact that Satan, who also expects the same celibacy, saves people from there by reimposing the obligation of circumcision, can be explained. Again, I have a really hard time saying that it's Satan, right? I think that if we're looking at this logically, I think Muhammad was inspired by teachings around him. So he utilized sources.
That's still satanic. It's still satanic to where there's no way you're trying to make Muhammad less satanic. No, if he's a false prophet, and thus, because look, hundreds of millions of people have now been left from, following the cross and the divinity of Christ, that's a satanic thing. You can't take the Satan out of this picture here.
At the core, okay, from the very beginning, at the core, and I would say that probably Muslims and Christians agree on this, that God created everything good. Would you agree with that?
No, I mean, there's evil. God created evil. God created good.
Okay, so that's a different position. I don't believe that God created evil. So that is another distinction between our points. But I would say, in the beginning, from a Genesis account in the Bible, it says God created everything and it was good.
Okay.
And the reason why I have a point here, that Satan, by free will, chooses to rebel against God, saying, I will be like him. And he is cast out of heaven, cast out of this world, and he tempts Eve. And what he uses, the mechanism that he uses to deceive, is twisting the truth. And so I would argue here that there's truth in this. So I'd say that Satan is reimposing, there's truth there, but it's twisted truth.
Okay. So let's write that down. Explained by simply Satan can do some good, but he is twisting the truth
for his own means. Sure.
Let's do that. Does this make sense? God, in this view, when God removed the circumcision requirement in the New Testament, his priority wasn't disease prevention, but moral purity. If everyone followed that, the risk of, when AIDS became a problem, Satan reimposing, if Satan also prompts celibacy in some context, it does not, Satan reintroduces, could be framed as him doing some good, but for the wrong reason. Okay, so this is probably a better explanation for you right here. For example, to create counterfeit religion to keep from the true gospel, or mix the truth with deception, twisting of the truth. Does it? Yes. Okay. From purely
so
logical.
Again,
well, hold on. Let's read this.
That's fine.
Okay. If you God's law are primary moral, spiritual, health. Satan can appear to do good, but from a purely logical point of view, the defense of option, but it requires a very specific theological stance where God's moral aims takes total precedence over. Okay, God's moral aims takes total precedence over practical health benefits. So does that when you say over practical health benefits means he doesn't care. And I think the AI missed this. How many people get AIDS? He could, but Satan corrects this lack of how does this make sense? Okay. So we're having a conversation. Just it sounds like Satan, I'm sorry, that God is indifferent to the suffering and Satan is compassionate, which obviously clashes with the Abrahamic portrayal of God as okay.
Okay, so that we both have, because again, both faiths would be classified as Abrahamic faiths. So we both have an issue from our theological standpoints. But again, I go back to the very beginning and say that our positions, so those premises that were listed in that, so said it was logically coherent. I would say our frameworks for understanding who God is and how he relates to humanity is very different. And I don't think that the Bible, like, I don't take this as a scientific textbook. Like, that's not what I'm claiming. And I think, again, I have heard, I mean, there are some Christians that do take that vantage point. I don't. But in Islam, I would say there's probably some that are, it's probably comparable. There's some that say that the Quran is a scientific textbook, and some would say it's not.
Okay, so I kind of saved you the trouble because to have that big long discussion with ChatGPT, we really cannot have it because what you got to do now, you got to point out all the mistakes it makes in its logic and feed it more information. I've actually done the homework. Stay away from sin, no problem. So let's see.
And you're not agree with that.
Yeah,
right. You're not agree with that.
One of the problem with this book is that the removal of obligation of circumcision prevents AIDS and STDs up to 60%. But what if someone were to argue a rebuttal that if people stayed away from sin, there would be no problem, therefore no error? Is this logically sound? So let's see what they say. What's valid about the rebuttal is that the truth that a certain behavior reduces the risks. Okay, in a perfect world, circumcision might not be needed for disease prevention. Let's keep reading. Where the rebuttal fails logically, it ignores the real world human behavior. A good guidance system, especially from an all-knowing God, must account for how humans actually behave. That's absolutely right. Not just how they should behave. People sin. People make mistakes. That's universal reality. Omitting a medically protective practice because of ideal scenarios is a negligent design. Okay, so this explanation you're giving doesn't make sense. Oh, I'm just focusing on the moral, but Satan is focusing both on moral as well as the scientific benefits. That doesn't make sense, as you can see right here.
So I have some questions for you, if that's okay. Do you believe that Allah is omniscient?
Omniscient meaning all-knowing, is that what you mean?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you believe that what was his purpose for creating humanity?
So this is a test, and
I'm not trying to test. I'm generally trying to understand because I don't know.
The purpose of humanity is as a test.
Oh, as a test. Humanity is a test.
Yes.
Okay. That is a different starting point than what I would say from a Christian perspective. So I'm part of a movement that tries to get back to historical biblical Christianity and looks to the early church for understanding. It's called the Restoration Movement. And so as part of that, the understanding that I'm convinced and convicted of is that humanity was created for relationship, that God lovingly created humanity. And to actually have a loving relationship, free will has to be a part of it. And so the idea for me is, why would God has the capacity, I think, in both systems, both in Islam and Christianity, God has the capacity to do whatever he wants with whatever he wants. But in my system, because he loves, he gave freedoms, but he gave a better way. And I would say that the gospel is a better way, but still, he knew what humans were going to do. He did give instruction, and that instruction is the ethic that we see in scripture.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew what evil would happen. But the thing is, like, my question would be, what do we do with humanity, responsibility, the problem of evil, the source of evil,
Well,
all those
all
things
of
in those
that is a red
systems?
herring. All of that has nothing to do with this problem, which I'm showing you. That what is undeniable is that this book carelessly removed the obligation of circumcision, thus causing people to get AIDS. While Satan, so it's not, that's just half the problem. We got to, the full problem, which we're tackling here, is Satan now comes and reimposes that protection, saving people from the negligence of God. That doesn't happen. That's Delulu. It's the
Okay,
other
so
way around.
again,
So
another question. Is Allah, does he determine everything? Is he also the ultimate determiner? Like, do you believe in divine determinism?
yeah, I mean a certain type of predestination. Yeah.
Okay, so that, where does human agency fall into that? As far as, does God predetermine who will be saved and who will not be saved?
Yes.
He does. Okay, so I don't believe that. And so again, that's another issue with all of this. So I think that we're coming into different vantage points. And so ultimately, because we have different starting points, we're going to have different ending points. And I think really we're just going to talk in circles until we actually get to the core of the issue.
No, that we do not have to get to talk about predestination and things like that to
Well,
try to solve this problem. Look, here's what's
okay, so
happening. Tyler,
if
here's
God is
what's happening.
predeterminer,
You are veering off on all these other tangents. This is called a red herring fallacy.
I'm not
Although
familiar
they're
with it.
sort of slightly kind of related, they're not going to answer the dilemma that we are faced with right here. Okay, so there's only, look at, here's what we have to agree. Let's go right back straight to the top. Obviously, as you can see, I've had the discussion with ChatGPT in which it pointed out this is all circular reasoning. That there is no justification for this idea that, oh, I'm just focusing on the moral part, but negligent of the scientific part, and that this and the harm that this could cause people. There's no defense of that. And then later, Satan comes and fixes this mistake. There's no justification for that. There's no explanation for that. We've tried. And I think we scroll right back to the top, or where we have this problem here that, option 2 makes the most sense. Okay, now this is logical. Option 1, we've exhausted it, which is what Christianity is based on. It's Delulu. That's crazy.
So,
Option
but
2
in
is
your own using of ChatGPT, it says my position was logically defensible and coherent. And again, I go back to the philosophical issue of the problem of evil and determinism.
You've got
Because
to you got to have a discussion with ChatGPT where you feed it information.
Right, and we can,
like, for example,
we can make it
let me show you.
Say whatever we want to, but you were using your ChatGPT, not mine. So I was just saying,
okay,
that was the
yeah. I was hoping it would remember the discussion and all the points. Like, for example, let me show you this. ChatGPT, you are wrong. It is preposterous to assume that God only focused on the moral aspect of circumcision and ignored the scientific issues, such lack of protection of AIDS. From AIDS, only to have Satan correct this negligence, thus saving millions from AIDS. Let's see what it says. Will it defend anything it says from AIDS? Let's see what it says. I agree with you. You see, you got to have that discussion with him where you feed it the correct answers and where it makes mistakes. So, so what do so if we keep option 2, God originally gives the beneficial rule, thus Satan removing it and God restoring it is the one that makes internal sense. So there's no way you're going to make sense of what we're trying to, of option 1. There's no defense of option 1. Okay. So that we can walk away from. So there's clearly within, I don't know, what was that, 20, 30 minutes, we were able to disprove Christianity within.
So I will
and
go
this
back,
is,
if
this
I
is
may.
just, oh, by the way, this is just scientific error number 1. This is
Okay, but
not
if I
just,
may,
yeah.
the philosophical theological issue I have is if God is the determiner of the one who elects people for salvation or damnation, the thing is that turns God into the source of sin and evil. And so the thing is, the very thing that you're talking about here, where again he would rectify and all these things, like God doesn't care in a system of predeterminism what ultimately happens with people with AIDS or not, right? And so if there is a determiner who determines people to actually commit these sins that lead to AIDS, it doesn't matter. So what I'm trying to say is, if God is not the one is the ultimately determining evil, ultimately determining sin, ultimately determining people's actions, it is on the person, and he gives a better way. And I think that New Testament teaching rectifies and negates the issue of circumcision and AIDS. That's my position.
I'm sorry, the last part I missed. What did you say?
I said, given the theological framework which I presented of the fact that God, in my position, is not the ultimate determiner of sin, evil, the source of those things, doesn't determine who will be saved or not, and is ultimately on human responsibility of whether they repent and turn to God. Humanity is the source of sin and suffering, and the New Testament teaching give them a better way to turn from that, to turn to God. And his way is, again, and that's another thing, is he removes the barriers to get to him. And so
Okay, so let me write this down. So some defenders of option 1 may argue that it is the better option because man is the author, is solely responsible. We could
is
say
the source, I would say, is the source of sin.
so. It's all on him.
That's why we believe people go to hell, is because of their own sinfulness.
Okay, so it's all on him. If he gets AIDS,
Yeah, absolutely. That's his choice.
His fault.
Yep.
Okay, so that's your don't blame. Don't.
If we're saying,
but that only explains removal. Doesn't and why would so? You're only addressing half the issue. So how do you now explain? Therefore, when Satan, when
and again, I go back to
Satan
the fact that he is a counterfeit truth.
offers a better scientific, the better scientific solution by reimposing circumcision. By reimposing circumcision, he is. So how do you explain that part then?
Again, I'm going back to what we said, and is the fact that it's a counterfeit truth. So he is, and again, in our system of theology, Satan is an author of, I mean, he is an angel of light. So he is deceptive. He is cunning. He is smarter than we are. He is more brilliant. He literally twisted the truth. It was 95% truth, and he put 5% lie in there, and he deceived Eve. And that's the whole idea from the Christian standpoint.
But the problem with that is imposing circumcision is not a twisting of the truth. It is what is scientifically right. It is what will protect people. Therefore, when the CDC, which is the article I showed you, are you telling me when they offer a voluntary circumcision program, this is some kind of satanic twisting of the truth? That's ridiculous. Circumcision is not a satanic, it's what is right you got to do.
So if we're going to go back to scientifically proven things, would you agree that there are certain vaccines that have actually helps mitigate and actually eliminate pandemics.
Yeah, there's certain things which do eliminate pandemics.
Okay. So, but do you think that people should have the freedom to refuse that? Or do you think that should be imposed upon everyone?
It would depend how bad the situation is.
Okay. That is, again, where I get to this issue of saying, when it comes to a clinical standpoint, a clinical versus moral, you get into a moral issue with forced vaccination, right? You break autonomy, you break, again, that's an imposition that most Westerners would say that my body.
Let me write that down. Therefore, by reimposing Satan is wrong because it violates freedom.
Eliminate.
It violates freedom of choice.
Sure.
Okay.
But this is making assumptions on freedoms.
Does this make sense more? Does this make more sense than option 1, option 2?
Obviously, it's not.
Where the still struggles, verdict, Humanson option does make more sense than care about AIDS, but it still comes across as less internally consistent. So they're not going to accept this. It's baloney. And I say it's baloney too, but they're being more, they're more polite. Let's end it on this. Islam is the best option right here. Okay. So they're not going, that option 2 remains. This is what makes sense. Okay. So what I have presented to you is clear-cut evidence that Islam is the true religion. You can play with this more at home if you like to see if the things you and this is, to try to make your option number 1 make sense, more sense than option 2. And again, see, if I were to tell you, look, dude, this is nonsense and this is what you're speaking doesn't make sense, then the debate goes on forever. But now even I'm bringing a second thing here, ChatGPT, which is clearly and positively identifying Islam as the true religion. Okay.
I appreciate this. And again, instead of actually presenting my position, which I had prepared for, I did a refutation. So I apologize, but I would, I know I want to honor your time and I appreciate this conversation. I want to honor your time. I want to honor what you have going on, but I would like just a short time just to present. And maybe if you wanted to respond to my
position, we're going to do Islam. We're going to do Islam, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So let me give you a definition of evil,
Okay.
which I basically worked with on ChatGPT.
Okay.
A belief or practice causing tragedy, suffering, and misery, which is both needless and preventable in a population of people. So let's do this. If we were to feed this into ChatGPT, okay, because if I were to tell you, look, there's some aspects of Christianity which is evil, you're not going to, you're going to say no, not at all, not at all. There you go. Yes. Based on the definition of evil, this is option 1 can reasonably be classified as evil for the following reasons. Okay. What you are defending logically is evil. And now the option is for you to stop worshiping 3 gods. Because if Christianity is not true, then what you are actually that means all those explanations for Trinity are not true. And therefore, you're just worshiping 3 gods. Again, logically, without going into all that debate, which will be our next discussion. Okay. So if Islam is true, you are worshiping 3 gods. And this is not the belief of Abraham, Moses, Isaac, and Jacob, or all the prophets. And by the way, when I say you are a pagan idol worshiper, this is the consensus of Judaism. The rabbis also say you are a pagan idol worshiper. So the problem comes to this idea what Christianity came, God is a Trinity, it's 3 in 1. You must
again,
repent.
that's another that's
Yeah,
another
which we will get to
conversation.
that. We'll get to Islam
Right.
now, which I think
So
let's do your
I,
5 minutes for Islam.
if I may,
Yeah,
real quick to respond to this last point, I would
yeah.
actually change my definition of evil is an offense against God. So it's not so much an offense against humanity as it is the creator.
It's both.
Well, but the thing is, if we're looking at
When
it, if
I
we're
go
looking
on
at
a
evil,
no. When somebody goes on a tangent and does these mass shootings, that's evil, and you don't have to be a Christian to believe in that.
but the reason why it is inherently evil is because it's an offense against a person, but because that person is made in the image of God. As far as my perspective,
Yes,
that's why it's so evil, is because life is sacred. And so, yes, I agree with parts of that, but I would say I would elevate that to say that it's an offense
you're
against
right.
God.
Okay.
And so, all that to say, again, I wasn't prepared for this, and that's fine. And I appreciate your presentation. I definitely have some things to consider. However, I do think
If
my
you're not
position
prepared, we
is,
can meet
oh, yeah,
again. Take
that's
everything.
fine.
I've give you everything. We can meet
Right.
again, but I'm going to let you
Yeah.
know there's no way you can intelligently defend option one.
Again, we're going to agree to disagree on that, but I do think, like you
Let's
said,
see if you
I
can.
do have.
I'll give you 2 weeks.
Okay, we can do that. I appreciate that.
And you can then show me and use ChatGPT, use DeepSeek, use whatever logical tool you want, and we can then see how you can try to make option one work.
No, I
Okay.
appreciate that.
All right.
Okay. So, if I may, and I don't want to, again, this has gone on for a decent amount of time, and I want to respect your time.
Let's do Islam
But
now. Okay.
okay, what I did prepare, and if I may, I want to share my screen. Let's see if I can do this without share screen. Okay. So, see if I can do this. Actually, I don't know how to do this. Can you see my screen?
Oh,
or no?
hold on. I think I have to add to stage. There you go.
Okay. So let's see if I can share
Oh, wait a
this.
second. I don't know if it's present or invite. What in the world? Why are you sharing your screen right now?
I am not. Let me share my screen and
Yeah, share your screen so I can add it. I saw something pop
okay.
up. I'm like,
So
oh, is that am I supposed to do that?
Did that work?
Add to stage. There we go.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I would say that there are several levels of issues in this conversation. First, I want to say that both Christianity and Islam believe in divine authority and revelation. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Both Christianity and Islam believe in the creation and the sacredness of male and female biological sexes. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Both Christianity and Islam believe that marriage is a sacred institution, and both hold marriage in high regard. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Lastly, Christianity and Islam teach mutual spousal respect, honor, love, and care. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Although there's one exception, I think in the New Testament it actually encourages celibacy. So there's some issues there.
Okay. Well, and that again, biblically speaking, Paul says that's a concession on his end. He's not saying it's a divine command. So it's just his opinion, not actually
because the
divine
Catholics
command.
will disagree, and so I
Well,
don't
again, I'm not a
that
Catholic.
situation.
I'm not a Catholic, and I also would, I'm not a Catholic. And the earliest Christian sources would say that, again, not marrying is not marriage. If you choose, anyways, that's another thing. But again, I think that if you want to be celibate, that's great. If you want to be married, that's great. But I think marriage is a divine institution given, and both systems hold in high regard. So I'd say the key differences are sources of teaching. So this is where I have that first point is the idea of where we get the Old Testament, New Testament, and the Quran, right? So when we talk about the teachings of Christ and the teachings of Muhammad, when we talk about the source of authority, we talk about where these things come from, we are relying on text. Would you agree with that? We're relying on, like, Islam relies on the Quran, the Hadiths.
Sure.
Christianity relies on the New Testament and early Christian sources. So the early manuscripts exist within decades of the originals, as far as within the New Testament is concerned. Quran, the earliest fragments exist within a century or two of the events. So again, and if someone like Bart Ehrman were coming, would say, well, based on that, he says that Jesus is a myth, and he thinks that it allowed for legend even within decades. However, I think with this, Islam gives greater opportunity for that to happen. Thousands of manuscripts, fragments allowing for robust textual criticism. We have fewer early manuscripts. We also have the burning of Caliphate Uthman and the claims purity based on standardization. anyways, we're starting from different points as far as what can actually be saying, what did Jesus actually say versus what did Muhammad actually do and say. And we also have the corroborated external sources like Pliny, Josephus, among others, on key historical points. Scant external sources exist and mention Muhammad in early detail. So all that to say, the positions on this as a Christian, and this is a lot of arguments can be made on this, but I will make it short. When I'm talking about the teachings of Christ and the early New Testament sexual ethic, we have ample sources to compare and actually say, what did Jesus say? What did early Christians do? How did they do this? And so that's what I'm appealing to. And again, when it comes to Muhammad, I don't really know. And again, like I said, I'm not a Muslim scholar. I'm not claiming to know, but given from my best understanding, what we have is the tradition of what Muhammad taught and what he did. However, how we could corroborate that might be different places. So that's one point I would say of very distinct issues there when it comes to the sources. So the next one would be that of polygyny and marital authority. So here on my screen, you can see there's a whole litany of issues between talking about monogamous families and polygamous families. And I know Islam, from my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, that monogamy is the predominant practice in Islam. However, there is permission for polygyny up to 4 wives per one man. Is that correct?
Right.
In some practices. Okay. In Christianity, it is, in biblical Christianity, it is only one man, one woman at one time for a lifetime. So it's talking about the differences between monogamy, polygamy. So there's that, child health, societal crime rates, parental investments, the fertility. So that is, so in summary, all that to say that when it comes to monogamy, women in monogamous families show better mental health, higher self-esteem, greater life satisfaction. It also promotes better outcomes for children across the board, including academic achievement, mental health, physical health, social adjustment. It also means that there's higher levels of paternal engagement and investment, and there's lower crime rates amongst societies that practice monogamy. Polygamous families, it seems that there is higher risk of lower psychological well-being. There's risk for academic, mental, physical, and social problems, as well as increased risk of abuse, neglect, and decreased involvement parentally. And those societies that practice polygamy or polygyny specifically have higher societal crime rates and warfare. So with that, we see that while Islam would promote a teaching that is more problematic for the society and the individuals, children, all that as a whole. Another departure is that of age of marriage. And so I'm not trying to, again, I'm not going to go into specific details other than just saying age of marriage is something that is often brought up within Muslim countries, cultures, and Christians. I know that's a point of contention, but we see here that there's higher risk of divorce, instability, psychological and emotional, financial, physical health issues with all of these things. So the summaries would say that early marriage is linked to emotional, psychological unpreparedness, stress, depression. Women face higher risk of poverty, loss of education and employment opportunities, physical health risks such as high risk pregnancy of young mothers. Children of early marriages face high risk because of pregnancies, of those high risk pregnancies. They also tend to be less stable, financially unstable, and poverty risk increases. Later marriage has greater emotional, psychological, financial benefits.
Okay, and I think that's a 5 minutes there.
Okay, 5 minutes,
but
but
I'll let you go a little bit longer. So let me first deal with the first one on Islam. First of all, polygamy is not for all the studies where you show that polygamy causes these problems. None of that applies with Islam because polygamy is not for everybody in Islam. Like, for example, me. Could I go out and get a second wife? No, because you don't have the money. Do you have the money to buy 2 houses, one for each wife, and the health insurance and cars, 2 cars? Those are the people who are allowed to have polygamy. The Prophet of Islam had 9 wives. Each wife had their own house. This nonsense which you are seeing in today's time, where you've got this one house and he's stacking all his, like in the Mormons are doing, they're stacking all their wives and kids under one house, thus causing all this problem. This is un-Islamic. In fact, polygamy is a source of the hellfire. A lot of people don't know. You can burn in hell for doing polygamy if you don't do justice between your wives. There's a hadith about that. That one of the people who will be in the hellfire is the one who didn't do justice between his wives. So many men, in fact, somebody asked me recently, he wanted to get a second wife. I'm like, how much money you got? You know, I mean, he actually had a pretty decent job. I said, no. Can you buy another house? Let's see, how much does the house cost in the going rate for a house? Like I'm in Florida for a decent house, about $500,000. You got additional $500,000. That means you got 2 mortgages you got to pay. Well, we don't do interest, but you understand. So no, all that polygamy stuff doesn't apply to us. So let me show you now. It's for rich people, but let me show you what happens when you do not apply polygamy to the rich people who should be having more than one wife. If you are rich, it should, honest to God, it should be a law. Because let me show you why I'm saying it should be a law for the rich people to have what's it called, more than one wife. Then you get this crap, which you see here in America. Okay. Let's take a look. Here you go. New York rapper Ziddy will be expecting children with 5 different women at the same time. Okay? This is absolutely unacceptable. Now, why are all these girls with him? He's a rich guy. He's a famous rapper. We all also know that monogamy doesn't work for rich people. What percentage of rich married men cheat? Right around 43%. A study also found that more than half of wealthy men are unhappy in their marriages. Look, you got money. If you got money, like you're a millionaire, yeah, go get yourself a second wife for God's sake, so you can stop creating these catastrophes for us. And we got to pay for all those illegitimate children. All right. So there's no issue of polygamy causing problems in Islam if applied right. And I'm sorry, what was your second objection?
So if I may respond to this, the second one was age of marriage.
Okay, I'm sorry, my ears
No,
are
you're
just
fine.
hurting because these headphones are basically like, they're
Oh yeah, they're noise canceling.
yeah, because they're like, for out on the shooting range, and my ears are
Yeah,
being tore up here. So also I'm like lifting it up to give my ear a rest here. Okay.
yeah, I understand.
Age of marriage. Look, the issue of age of marriage. I mean, when we talk about, there's a
Climate
lot of
and consent. Yeah.
yeah. What Islam does, first of all, both Islam and Christianity, they don't have a specific number for age of marriage. That's a fact. Okay. But what Islam does do, it gives you a criteria for marriage. Okay. What you should do, blah, 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 blah. The Prophet, in fact, I'm going to show you a hadith, which states very clearly that, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Let me share my screen over here. Because there is this issue about people marrying children and what Islam teaches in regards to that. So let's go right here and let's go to Aisha, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here we go. A woman is married for 4 reasons: her property, her status. Okay, a child doesn't have property, child doesn't have status, her beauty, and her religion. So try to get the one who is religious. May your hand be besmirched with dust. So it's actually threatening people, condemning people. So I can show you a child here, like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old child. What the hell impresses any man about her religious? And it's not just her religious, her character, her overall, and when we talk about religious character, we're talking about, wow, like there's so much goodness in you. There is nothing you are going to see in a 13-year-old girl that's going to impress you. All right, that's a fact. Unless, even if you have this tendency for young girls, you still ain't going to get impressed. All right. So let's keep reading here. Blah 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 blah. Let's see. And yeah. Now, what happens when you marry children? Now, do you have any kids by any chance?
I do.
A daughter?
And same age as, yeah, she's 7.
Okay. God forbid the parents go into the room of the child and say, "Hey, you know what? You're gonna get married. What's gonna happen? I've got 2 daughters. Oh, God, I don't want to leave my house, Daddy. I don't want to leave." Of course, it's ridiculous. Let us read what it says over here. That her father gave her in marriage when she was a matron, and she disliked it. She disliked that marriage. So she went to Allah's messenger, and he declared the marriage invalid. So here's my point. Children are naturally going to resist any kind of marriage proposals. All right. Kids are supposed to be playing on their iPad. They're going ice skating, all the things that kids do. They're not going to want to get married. So this hadith right here protects any kind of child marriage ideas that somebody may have in their heads. Now, it is true, some people can strip the rights from the child, but that's not Islamic.
I want to be, I don't want to steal, like, I don't want to do a straw man argument, but from my understanding, there are predominantly Muslim countries in the Arab world that are trying to push for lowering the age of consent and marriage and moving the authority from the individual to that of their religious leaders, because of the Prophet's example with Aisha. And so, and I've also heard Sunnah, is it 65:4, where, again, I mean, I've got I'm not an expert in this, but that this, it seems to me to teach that you actually have, after the age of pubescence, that marriage should be allowed. However, again, at what age is there, and that's the question that I would have, because again, from a Christian Judeo-historic, like from what we have from the rabbinic teaching, there is no marriage before puberty, and it's usually the age of marriage was between 12 and 20. And if you were single after the age of 20, then you would be restricted.
There is no age limit in the Bible to get married.
No, there's not, but we have the extra biblical accounts from history, and the religious law that does say that, I mean, the rabbinic teaching that would say that it's only after they have reached puberty, which would be at the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah point in time where they're confirmed.
You're going to find people misapply Islam. You're going to find people who cave into certain pressures. That's why we go back to the Islamic text. What Islam said, I think, makes sense. That's really good. That that a woman is married, for these reasons, and it listed them. That excludes any kind of child. Okay. And just follow when you look at a woman who impresses you, her religious character, you're talking about in the 20s at least, maybe 17, 18, maybe again. So we're out of childhood at least. That's the right thing to do. And if people were to apply Islam, we would not see any of this child marriage stuff.
But okay, and I appreciate your viewpoint, because I think that is, I would agree with your viewpoint very much so. However, given would you say Muhammad is the exemplar in your faith, in your life? Okay, but from what we have, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, we have him being engaged to a 6-year-old at 50. Right. So he's 50, sure. She's 6, and he consummates at 9, and he's 53. To me, and I understand societal norms are different. However, when compared to their Jewish counterparts, nothing of the sort would have happened. And so I hear you. I hear that we are not going to, you're not impressed by little kids, and their spiritual standing. I get that. Actually, I'm actually impressed by, not sexually, but I am spiritually impressed because of the faith of some children, and the innocence and the purity of some children, but not sexually by any means. However, it seems like there is this example, and Jesus even talked about, as far as you have to be like the child in order to inherit the kingdom of God because of their faith. So yes, I can be impressed by their faith, but I'm not looking at them in any sexual or relational means of saying, hey, I'm impressed and I actually want to have a relationship with them that goes beyond that is, parent-child, or that of I'm going to try to help care and foster them spiritually. But given the example that we have, and that's where I go back to the issue of the source, is based on what we have about Muhammad and that of Jesus. It's very different when they actually are exemplifying their lifestyles and their choices for living out their sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
And I would say that what you described is inconsistent with what I have understood that of the prophet's example to be.
We can talk about the Aisha marriage. So let me go ahead and explain that one. So the issue here is, there are exceptions to the rule, and I'll show you that. The Aisha argument, it's not going to disprove Islam in any way. Here, let me show you why. I'm just going to share my screen here. Because number one, why, if we read the Quran, we see Surah chapter 33, verse 32. It says, "O wives of the Prophet, you are not like any other women." So there's something very different about Aisha. And what I want to show you, I'm going to both give you the refutation, and then I'm going to show you how actually the marriage of Aisha is an evidence for Islam. But one thing I want to ask you before I give you the refutation, maybe let me stop sharing. I want to ask you, what's going on here? Because you mentioned the example of Christianity, and this is not part of my explanation to your question, but I'm just asking a side question. Yeah. So let us just break down your question kind of in it comes down to this. Bearing a child, like for example, a 9-year-old child, this is a sexual perversion. Therefore, a prophet of God should not engage in a type of sexual perversion. That's your argument, basically, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Okay. But the problem is, inside the New Testament, in the Old Testament, Lot had sex with his 2 daughters, which we are both parents, we know is a sexual perversion. So if Christianity is a happy replacement for Islam, aren't you just replacing one sexual perversion with another sexual perversion?
So two answers to that. One, Lot was drunk. His
alleged
daughters got him.
Sexual perversion, yeah.
Okay, well, but he was drunk, so it's different between consensual saying I'm actually going to be in this contract.
Justification. You're a parent. I'm a parent for this type of teaching. I'm
just saying I have not ever been drunk, but from what I understand, if you're blackout drunk, you have no idea what you've done. So I will say that I can't speak from experience. However, I am a Christian, so I'm looking to the teaching of Christ. I'm not looking to the example of Lot. So I am not beholden to the Old Testament covenants or even their narratives as I am to the New Testament.
But it's part of the Bible. When you give
it's part of the Bible, but however, again, I agree. And again, what do we do with it? And I say he was a sinful human who was drunk.
No, the Bible doesn't say he was sinful.
Oh, the Bible does say that he committed a sin, that it was sinful action.
Okay, if we're going to pull it, wrong. Let's
I'll go to Genesis and we'll look at it.
Yeah. Lot slept with his daughters. Lot slept with his daughters in the Bible. Did the Bible condemn this action? No explicit moral condemnation is recorded in the narrative. This is from ChatGPT. Now, of course, you have laws which forbid it, like Leviticus chapter 18, verse 6. Of course, don't have.
They didn't have. Of course, they didn't have the laws.
Now, that's a problem. The Bible in Leviticus condemns sexual relations with close relatives, but the New Testament came and did away with the laws. So now Christians can engage in these type of actions. If the law is no longer applied, do you see the problem? So this is a problem.
I will actually refute that, because 1 Corinthians 5 actually talks about a man having a relationship with his stepmother, and he said that's abhorrent, and even the pagans don't do that. So
let's talk about children. Let's talk about your own daughter, though. I mean, do you see the moral dilemma caused by New Testament Christianity because the Leviticus laws says thou shalt not sleep with your mom, thou shalt not sleep with your sister, thou shalt not sleep with, and it goes this big long list of people. But now Paul came, so this is a second evidence against him. First, he gave everybody AIDS. Second objection, he did it when you do away with the law and say you no longer have to follow it. This allows you now to marry your sister.
Again, it's clearly condemned in the New Testament.
Now the New Testament reinstates whatever laws it wants to keep. Marrying your sister and your daughter is not one of them.
Well, and Jesus does say that he reconfirms certain commands that were in the Old Testament,
Okay,
and then
marrying your sister and daughter is not one of them.
he obviously does say that it was one man, one woman in relationship before God. There was not any
Okay.
kind of incestuous, again. But going back to what we have a clear, explicit teaching in the New Testament.
No, what
It's
we're looking for is where God
okay.
punished Lot for having sex with his
Okay.
own children.
So again, if we read the account, so that night they got him drunk, his daughters, with wine. The older daughter went in and had intercourse with her father. He was unaware of her lying down and getting up. The next morning, the older daughter said to the younger sister, I had sex with our father last night. Get him drunk with wine again tonight and go and have sex with him. That way, we'll preserve our family line through our father. That night, they got him drunk with wine again, and the younger daughter went and had intercourse with him. And before he was unaware of her lying down and getting up again. So as a result, both Lot's daughter became pregnant. And so the issue that we see here is that he was unaware and he was drunk. It was not his own choice. He did not consensually, he did not pursue those relations. And again, from a New Testament perspective, 1 Corinthians 5 says, I can hardly believe the report about sexual immorality going on among you. Something that pagans don't even do. I'm told that a man in your church is living in sin with his stepmother. So if a man in sexual relationship with his stepmother is a problem, how much more of a problem is it going to be with anybody in an immediate family?
I see no condemnation, but just trying to explain away the text.
No,
There is
okay.
no justification. Even if you get drunk, even if you're got heroin, I don't care what it is for a man to be having relations with his children. There's no justification for that at all. Oh, I just didn't know. What was going on, man? No, that doesn't work. So we got to move on to my refutation.
No, I will say this is the last thing that I'll say about this. This is describing an event. This is not prescribing, it's describing. And so there's a difference between permission and prescription than just description.
Okay.
So I mean,
that's same thing with Aisha then. It's just prescriptive, not descriptive. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. There you go.
But it's different though when Lot's not my moral exemplar. Christ is.
Okay. Well, okay.
Muhammad is your moral exemplar.
He's a prophet of God. So what's undeniable?
Lot is not a prophet.
Lot is a prophet of God.
Okay, in my estimation, in my understanding, Lot is not a prophet like Abraham, or because in this time, Abraham was the prophet, not Lot.
Was he a man of God?
At moments, yes,
he was.
He was.
Both in Islam and Christianity, Lot is a prophet. We call him Luke.
Well,
yeah.
Again, I think from my understanding, he is not regarded in Christianity as a prophet with the same regard that Moses or Abraham would have. So he's not an immoral exemplar.
And from this incestal relationship, you get two nations of people, the Moabites and the Ammonites, from this incestal relationship.
And they're at war. They're at war with the Israelites, and that's the same thing with the Ishmaelites.
What we can say is no, the Bible does not condemn it, and then the New Testament comes and does away with the law which you were boasting about, and so now you guys are free to do what Lot did. Okay, so what you are
doing, absolutely not. Again, we'll agree to disagree, but we can move on to your point now.
So the argument stands that you're just replacing one sexual perversion with another alleged sexual perversion, but that's okay. That's not
actually
my defense.
I'm sorry. And this will be the last thing, and I'll be quiet. Actually, the Greek word of porneia and moikos and arsenokoitai, and there's another one. Basically, every sexual sin that Paul says that is damnable to hell covers incest, bestiality. It covers all of those things. So the Greek readers would have understood that when he said sexual immorality, he uses it 3 times in 1 Corinthians. Let me pull it up. 1 Corinthians. Actually, here, I'll do one better. I'll pull it up on here so we can actually look at it together. So he actually condemns the sexual sin, and he uses 3 words. Actually, it's in Galatians. Let me pull that up. Galatians 5. So he condemns. Here we go. Okay, so let me, if I may share my screen. Let me do this. So we will do share screen. Galatians 5. Here we go. And so we'll actually look at the words. So it says the sinful nature wants to do the evil, was the opposite of the spirit, gives us the desires that are opposite of what sinful nature desires. Two forces are constantly fighting. He says, when you follow the desires of sinful nature, the results are very clear. Sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures. So when we look at the Greek, this is the definitions. So here we have porneia, akatharisa, and osologia. So the porneia is actually coming up, and it says illicit sexual intercourse, adultery, fornication, homosexuality, lesbianism, intercourse with animals, close relatives, sexual intercourse with a divorced man or woman, worship of idols, defilement of idolatry. Okay, so that's one of the definitions. I don't know, did that didn't show, did it? Oh yeah, no, it did. Okay. Actually, the definition didn't show. Let me present. I apologize. Let me do this other. I can't. Okay, so let me show this top screen, present the other screen, because I want to make sure everybody can, we can agree on this. So here's the porneia one, and it talks about the definition I just read there. So that includes homosexuality, fornication, adultery, intercourse, bestiality, incest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he uses another word, which is akatharisa, which is that's just uncleanliness, physical, moral, impurity, lustful, that kind of thing. The next one, the sensuality, is unbridled lust, licentiousness, all of that. So, but when we look at this, it's understood when he uses the word porneia that it is talking about the very things that you're saying that it doesn't prohibit, and it does. If people would understand that, at least the original audience would have understood that. So just like when we say sexual perversion, they would have understood what that meant. And so, and he clearly states in 1 Corinthians 5 that an incestuous relationship, even with a non-blood relative, is abhorrent, and even the pagans won't do it. So it is absolutely condemned, and it is clear from the original languages.
Okay, let's move on just very quickly to Aisha,
Yes,
the issue of Aisha. So in order for this argument to work, that means you have to look at a young child and thus become aroused and thus wants to engage in relations with that young child. However, no such thing ever really, that's not how this thing happened or why the marriage was there. Let me share my screen right here. Why did the Prophet of Islam marry Aisha? The Prophet said to her, "You have been shown to me twice in my dream. I saw you pictured on a piece of silk, and someone said to me, 'This is your wife.' When I uncovered the picture, I saw that this was yours." So the point here being is the idea of marriage with Aisha wasn't his idea. This is something coming directly from God himself. So there's no issue here of, casting gaze upon a child and thus becoming sexually aroused. That's just not the case. Now, what if this, so the immediate knee-jerk reaction of the critic is going to be, I reject the hadith. I reject that this is from God. Or maybe Muhammad is just justifying it. Well, if you reject the hadith, then that gives me the license to reject the hadith about Aisha being 9. So this is actually, it creates a domino effect. So that is the argument, is clearly resolved over here. As we can see, there's no problem because that wasn't his idea to marry her to begin with. And hadith rejection, if you reject this reference I'm giving you, then I will reject the hadith you give me. So there you go. The problem is resolved. Now, this is just part of my defense. I still haven't shown you how the marriage of Aisha with Muhammad is actually an evidence for Islam. But first, I want to just deal with the objection. Go ahead.
Well, my question would be, so divine instruction prompted Muhammad to marry a prepubescent child.
Oh, I didn't hear you. Could you repeat that?
So from my understanding, it was divine instruction that prompted Muhammad to marry a prepubescent child.
Well, she wasn't prepubescent, but she was at 9.
At 6, wasn't?
No. It was 9 years old.
but it was revealed to her at 6 that he would marry her, correct?
The idea, yes, the
Okay.
decision was at
So
6, consummation at 9.
Okay, but it was divine revelation saying that a 6-year-old should be engaged to marry a
Correct.
50-year-old man from divine.
Yes, and I'll show you a powerful
Okay.
evidence to show that is the truth. But go ahead. Let's start with the objection.
Again, I struggle to see how that is. Again, with my understanding of the character of God, it just seems that seems problematic to me.
Because maybe
So.
your understanding of the character of God is wrong, right? I mean, that could be. Okay, let me show you the evidence now. Because remember why, and the problem here is why should we look at Aisha like any other child? Because the Quran said that the wives of the prophet's wives, they're different. They are, and we know historically Aisha wasn't like any other child. So I think if you just look at Aisha as like any other child, then we could see how that could be problematic. But we as Muslims, we actually don't. Now let me give you the evidence to show you the evidence that this is from God. So, like you said, the idea of marrying a 6-year-old was done at 6, at the age of 6. But what we know about Aisha now is today she had a very special talent, a very special ability which no other child has. And that is she became the gospel bearer. She, like, in the Bible, you got Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Luke. Aisha, we follow, and why is it that we even follow Islam and so much we know about Prophet Muhammad? Because she wrote her own gospel, the Gospel of Aisha, which is the same thing. All you're doing is from which we is collected in the Hadith canon. The Hadith canon is basically this. Her gospel is cut up into a bunch of different pieces and scattered out through all these books, Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Ibn Abu Dawud, and thus all her gospel has been spread out through these books. So the question is this: how could a man look at a child at 6 years old and know that this girl has this special talent, which will then change you could say, form the religion for millions of people to know and learn and follow Prophet Muhammad through Aisha? You can't look at a child and know that. There's no way that this child has this unique talent. And secondly, to prove this is from God, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. What do you notice about them? Well, they're all men. Men write religious scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the list goes on. Men write these books. But what makes Islam uncharacteristic is that the Gospels or the scriptures, you have a little girl in there, not even a woman, but a little girl. This makes Islam unique from all other religions, that it doesn't have a male writer for its scripture. So these are the two evidences I present to you to show you that Islam is from God.
So I appreciate that. My pushback would be, why couldn't she have been a gospel bearer without sexual relationship and communion with the prophet? Secondly, secondly, couldn't she have been groomed by the prophet if she came in contact with him at such a young age to become a gospel writer?
There was no grooming.
So you're saying, okay, I'll use a different word. So she couldn't have been taught and indoctrinated by the prophet because of her young age to, like, in connection with him. Because that's the issue that I'm seeing is, why did it have to be sexual? Why did it have to be? Why couldn't she just been a miraculous child and be a gospel writer without a sexual relationship? And because of that sexual relationship and because of that marriage, she was indoctrinated by the prophet. So how do we know that it was actually divine and not actually based on Muhammad?
How do
just on his own teaching?
How do
like just on his own teaching and his own? That's my issue. Is if you separated Aisha and if she confirmed Muhammad as the prophet and his life and teaching, apart from this sexual relationship and marriage to him, to me that would be more impressive than the idea that she was confirmed through divine sources to be this wife of his at a very young age. And then there had sexual consummation, they had this relationship, and later on, after the prophet dies, she becomes kind of this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but this first among the wives, or kind of the beloved mother of the wives of, or not beloved mother, but beloved wife of the prophet, right? So she becomes like kind of the chief one. And why did it have to be that way? Why couldn't have there been a more, to me, it'd be more miraculous if it didn't involve the marriage or the sex or even the training from the prophet. That to me is, because again, if we compare to Mary, and that would be the most, again, the comparison, I know a lot of people draw that comparison between Mary. Mary was, again, we don't know her age, but she was a virgin, so she had to be, and she had to be at the age of pubescence to be able to bear a child. That's understood. And based on the rabbinic teaching, she would have probably been around the age of 12, 13, or between the ages of 12 and 20. Joseph had to be, unless he had special permission, had to be married before the age of 20. Unless he had rabbinic approval, but there was also a time constraint. So if there was not a special approval of him being married, then he would have to have lived in celibacy after that agreed upon time if he was not engaged. And so this idea of him being outside of the age of 20 or in his 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, or whatever is kind of way outside of the norm and the understanding of Judaism. And so all that to say, but Mary becomes this, again, she is, to me, she is not to be in high regard, venerated, or adored like we do with Christ. She's important. But the same way that I give credence to Moses or to Abraham is the same level of credence I give to Mary. But it didn't involve any kind of sexual relationship to make her what she became. And it didn't even actually involve, it was her instruction that influenced Christ to a degree, as opposed to the other way around. And so it's very different. And so why did it have to involve the sexual component? And why did she have to be miraculous? Why couldn't she have been, again, it would have been more miraculous to me if it didn't involve the instruction and the consummation with Muhammad.
Again, you're kind of asking, well, first of all, you're asking a question, not so much raising an objection. So the answer to that is, I mean, from what I'm seeing, I'm giving my own opinion here. Why did God choose this specific way? I see it as a test, that will people accept God or reject God based on their own whims? Now, you don't have to like the relationship. I don't like any kind of, there's things, okay, well, I don't like this, I don't like that, but that doesn't prove that it is wrong just because I don't like something. Now, let me show you, let's go back to the definition of evil. The definition of evil is a belief or practice causing tragedy, suffering, and misery, which is both needless and preventable in a population of people. Well, what we can conclude with the marriage of Aisha with Muhammad, it was not evil based on this definition. So as in terms of your question, I would say it's some kind of test. And I don't have, of course, we're trying to guess why did God choose to do things a certain way. Those are very hard to answer. Those kind of questions are very hard to answer. And I don't have a good answer for that one. But I want to circle back to the fact that nobody can raise an objection against Prophet Muhammad based on the hadith that this is something which God ordained from him. Any attempt to undermine the hadith, saying, oh, well, he's just making up an excuse, or I reject the hadith, will cause a chain reaction of rejecting the hadith of 9 years old. And I can reject that one. So my point is this. We're kind of beating a dead horse here. There can be no intellectual argument be raised against Islam by the age of Aisha. It's because of the hadith which I quoted you, because the crux of the objection was the fact that somebody casting gaze upon a young child and getting sexually aroused. That just never happened. That's just not how this marriage transpired. So unless you have anything else you wanted to raise.
I do. My question would be, again, going back to the source. That's one thing that I also mentioned was the sources of our authority, as well as the ability to actually test the veracity of the claims, right? So for Jesus, we have narrative biographies contained in the Gospels within a few decades of his life. We have wealth of information of early Christian literature We have secular documents that even support the life of Christ, as well as some of his teachings and practices of his early followers. And so we have this triangulation of who Christ is and his teachings, and we have this rich textual criticism and evidence for it, where conversely, Muhammad, the evidence is primarily in narrative accounts with the Hadith and the Sirah, which are further removed from the source of the event, and it does not have some of the level of extra biblical or extra narrative sources historically that we do. So how do we know? We're taking someone else's word that Aisha was happy with the marriage, where as opposed to we don't have, again, or even how do we know that Muhammad treated his wives well? We're taking one person's word for it. Do we actually have the volume or the history? Or again, when compared to the New Testament in early Christianity, the life and teaching of Christ is much more, we have much more veracity for that than compared to Muhammad, his life, his teaching, his character, his conduct. And so really I'd say it's more faith. It takes more faith for a Muslim than it does a Christian when it comes to textual criticism, history, and even the proximity to the life of Christ.
Mm-hmm. So to answer the issues I think you raised about Christianity, one second, are the Gospels anonymous? Let me get you some references here. Okay. So the first part is you don't have any of that. If you really had the stuff that you're talking about, we wouldn't be having this discussion. The problem is all the Gospels which you have, which you're talking about, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these are all Gospels which are anonymous, meaning we don't know who wrote them. This is the consensus of the scholars who have researched this. Okay. Within the Gospels are not explicit. So let me get you some references from Bart Ehrman, why the Gospels are anonymous. Now, people like David Wood and all these and scholars, even like people like what's his name, Josh McDowell's son, they have had over 30 years to now rebut this claim that the Gospels are anonymous, to debate people like Bart Ehrman and Dr. Richard Carrier and other than them. And they have been running away because they know that there's no good evidence to show that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John really wrote these books. If there was really evidence that this stuff existed, we would have had at least 100 debates on the topic, but there isn't. So this is something which is, I think it's mythology. Secondly, the Gospels which we have today, they date back at best 200 to 300 years after Jesus. That's our earliest manuscripts. And these are just copies of copies of copies of copies. So you have no validity. You have literally nothing to stand upon when it comes to the veracity of the Gospels. And so this is, in fact, I wanted to share this article with you. And why I say it's an authoritative article from Dr. Bart Ehrman is because the Christian apologists have had now 30 years now to start debating this topic, start showing that you can challenge the objections and prove these things are written, and they haven't. Okay. This is a good article, Why the Gospels Are Anonymous, which is, by the way, the academic perspective. When I was a student at, I was a religious studies major from Bradley University, my college professor said, yes, look, this is the academic point of view. We have exhaustively looked for any evidence that Matthew wrote Matthew, Luke wrote Luke. There is none. There's no evidence to suggest this. Actually, there's evidence, clear evidence that they didn't. So the problem here is two. Number one, you have no basis to state anything about Jesus. There's no basis for that. Number two, the problem, there are evil teachings in the Bible, like what we saw with the Apostle Paul. There are literally evil teachings. So that's something you really need to consider. And it's that the issue of circumcision is just only one of the evil teachings of the Bible. There are a lot more, so much more that is just unimaginable. For example, you know that the New Testament caused the Holocaust, the death of 6 million Jews. Did you know that?
again, that would be a point that is refutable as far as I don't think the New Testament or the Old
All
Testament caused that.
academics, all scholars,
Oh,
listen to this.
I'm sorry, but
Every
that is not
single, okay,
that is not
that's okay
okay.
because you're a Christian, you live in America, so therefore you
Okay,
do
so I'm
not
just saying,
understand.
having been to
Well,
the Holocaust Museum, having watched documentary after documentary about the
yes,
Holocaust, no one ever cited that the Bible as the thing that incited the
let me
Holocaust.
show you the evidence. Let me show you the evidence. Let me repeat. All scholarship, everybody believes and has clearly stated that the New Testament is responsible for the genocide and mass murder of Christians. Okay, now let me share with you my references. Okay, because you mentioned you went to the Holocaust Museum. All right, so let's go to the Holocaust Museum. Let's go to the, and again, it's not like there's a difference of opinion here. This is unanimous. So let me share my screen, and I've got many references on the topic here. Thessalonians. Here we go. What role did the New Testament play in the Holocaust? Okay, the crucifixion story. It states very clearly, what am I writing here? Okay, it states very clearly that the teaching, which let me get down to the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial. This is the Yad Vashem. If you ever go to Israel, definitely go there. This is a beautiful building right here of the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial. You know, it's on my list of things to do. I'd definitely like to go there. From the video, I'm going to give you the video right here. Christian anti-Judaism, is basically was cited as one. If you look at the roots of Nazism, Christian anti-Judaism. What did that mean? That's too broad. What are you talking about? Let's get to the details.
So may I ask a
Hold on.
question?
Let me share with you this reference. Jewish belief that Jews were accused of deicide. Deicide means a killing of God. Rejecting and then killing the Messiah is one of the roots of Nazism. Okay? Who says? All of the experts. And where do we get that from? That's found in the book of Thessalonians. It states very clearly in the Bible that the Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus, and that is the root cause of the Nazi Holocaust. Let me give you a second reference. This is Fox News apologizes to Jews for Facebook post right here. The Simon Wiesenthal Center in Buenos Aires calls it a defamatory reference to the Vatican propaganda. Vatican propaganda where they're just stating, look, the Jews killed Jesus. Resulted in the persecution and murder of Jews for 2 millennia. What did it? Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 14. Okay, let me just get you a third reference, and I'll give you all these references here from the American Jewish Committee here. Okay, this is talking when it's anti-Semitism. The verse 25, which states from Matthew chapter 27, verse 24 to 25, that the blood is upon the Jewish people, has led to more Jewish suffering than any other passage in the Christian Bible. So they're actually citing a different verse. Okay, let's go to, and so the references again go on. And Hitler, look at how he beautifully, which of course I don't follow this guy here, but how he beautifully used the fact that the Jews killed Jesus, which is the teaching of the New Testament, to spread this type of propaganda. Here, listen to the words of Hitler. He says, and his mentality is as a foreigner to the true spirit of Christianity, as the character was foreign to the great founder, blah, blah, blah. He rambles on like an idiot. The founder of Christianity made no secret, indeed, of his estimation of the Jewish people. When he found it necessary, he drove those enemies of the human race out of the temple of God, because then, as always, they used religion as a means of advocating for their commercial interests. But at that time, Christ was nailed to the cross for his attitude towards the Jews. Here, my point is this. Hitler gave a beautiful exegesis of Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 14, which I reject. I reject as a Muslim because we believe he was not killed or crucified. So my point is this. Let's go to the Anne Frank house. Once again, pointing to 2 Thessalonians. Jews in Europe have been discriminated against and persecuted for hundreds of years, often for religious reasons. For start, they were held responsible for the death of Jesus. Who says? Anne Frank. Let me repeat. All experts, scholars, and academics have pinpointed New Testament as a source for the death of 6 million Jews. So these are all evil teachings in your book. It is undeniable.
Okay, so I want to get back to the claim of the veracity of the Gospels, because I have a pile of books literally on my desk about the attestation of the early church writings as well as the Gospel and who wrote the Gospels. And I even have one of Bart Ehrman's books that kind of is in support of that. But the question, okay, so we're talking about, so if I look at, and I'll share my screen, just because I didn't have the time to research, but since we have used AI on this conversation, I just typed in the simple question: is it true that the New Testament is responsible for the Holocaust? And if we scroll down, it says, in conclusion, while there's strong historical argument that certain New Testament interpretations and subsequent Christian anti-Judaism contribute to a long history of anti-Semitism that made the Holocaust possible, most scholars do not hold the New Testament itself directly responsible. Instead, they emphasize the complex interplay. And so I know that's a kind way of saying, oh, yes and no. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Wait, is that all that to say? I don't disagree that people have borne the name of Christ and have done things that were atrocious to people that were not Christians.
No, that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening. Let me.
That is what's happening, and it's. I would ask is, would you say
it's incitement? You're not understanding.
Okay, would you say that ISIS is representative of true Islam?
No, you're comparing apples and oranges.
It's not. It's the same thing because they're basing off of their text. No. Neo-Nazis are not Christian.
No. What's happening here?
Hitler was not a Christian either.
Okay, first let's just get the text in front of our faces, and I'll explain to you what the Jewish references are actually saying here. Okay, what all scholars agree. You see where. Let me first get the text in front of so we can understand what's happening here. It's not a matter of people misinterpreting the Bible. What's happening with the New Testament? It's inciting anger, hatred, animosity against them. For example, it said, let's first just get the text in front of us. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 14, from the Jews who killed the Lord Jesus and the prophets and also drove us out. So the New Testament makes it very clear the Jews killed Jesus. So what happens is, let's say you're looking at a crucifix and you see the dangling body of Jesus on the crucifix. A person who really is very religious, and they look at this, they start crying, oh my God, our Lord and Savior, how much he's suffering. And they're in church. Who did this? Who could do such evil? The Jews did it. So that it creates this anger and incitement into the mind of the born again Christian versus somebody misinterpreting a text and use it. That's not what's happening. So there's a very big difference here. So that's why I wrote here, crucifixion story incites hatred. That's what all the scholars will agree on. There's no doubt about that. And so, the issue here is that belief, if you look at it and trace it throughout centuries, you will see that belief reoccurring, just inciting such anger in the Christians that it caused them to do this type of terrible things.
Okay, the same passage or same book, 1 Thessalonians 5. Again, it's a contextual issue. 1 Thessalonians 5 actually says this: see that no one pays back evil for evil, but always try to do good to each other and to all people. And when taken in reference to Philippians 2, again, we're talking about Christ. He's the one that this is all centers around because he was crucified. Says, this is also Paul's writing. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others better than yourselves. Do not look out only for your own interest, but also interest of others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. This is Philippians 2, the very beginning. This is verses 3 through 5. And then it says, though he was God, did not consider equality with God as something to hold on to. Instead, gave up his divine privileges and took on the position of a slave. Born as a human being, appeared in human form, humbled himself in obedience to God, and died a criminal's death on the cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the highest place of honor. But the thing is, the idea of the sacrificial servanthood, that is what we're called to as Christians. We are not called in the early church, and this is where I'll tie these two things together, and I will, again, not try to go on a tirade about, or go off on tangents. The issue is the early church, the earliest Christians, whose writings that I'm going to share here momentarily, believed that Jesus was the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy that swords and spears were now turned into plowshares and farming implements. They would say we would turn, just like Jesus did, turn the other cheek. The early church was non-violent, non-resistant, and did not have the animosity and hatred that bellowed out from people's misinterpretations, misunderstandings, and using the scripture for their own selfish gain. So the same thing I would say is there are people that claim Christ, that have done things in his name that is totally anti-Christian and is not the historic or the biblical position.
Yeah.
And just as in Islam, there are groups that take the Quran and its teachings and take and twist it to use it for their own gains, and the end is catastrophe. Hitler was not a Christian. He did not like Christianity. He thought it was meeble and weak. He liked Islam because he thought it was strong and manly, and it had political benefits. So the thing is, if we're going to actually look at what religion inspired Hitler more, you could argue that Islam was more influential in the sense that he actually valued. He didn't like Islam or Christianity because he didn't believe that either one of them was true. However, he thought Christianity was weak and stupid, but Islam actually had some merits militarily, politically, and even socially. And so who inspired the Holocaust more? Again, yes, scripture was used, but again, I don't think if we're looking at Hitler, who is the source of the Holocaust, who was he inspired more by, Muslims or Christians? Again, he actually would probably show more favoritism towards Islam than Christianity.
Yeah, Islam.
My sources.
That's so ridiculous. There's no scholar.
You can look it up. Okay. You can look it up if you'd like to. That's fine.
Look,
but
this is silly. Tyler, listen, this is silly. We go to the academics, scholars, and historians, and if they say Islam is responsible for the Holocaust, I will accept. But I do not agree with. That's fine. Some of those were not scholarly by the definition, but what I'll agree with you. So the Bible doesn't come out and say just go kill all Jews and pick up arms and start.
No, the Quran actually has things that talks about opposing those of other faiths.
Listen, let's go back to the American Jewish Committee. It states very clearly, this verse has led to more Jewish suffering than any other passage in the Christian Bible. These are coming from the scholars.
So if I were to write in a Christian, okay, sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, let me finish my point. The issue is this: how the Bible incites hatred and violence may not be the way as you were stating, that pick up arms and go out and fight and kill them. No, the Bible doesn't really state that. But there's other ways you could do it. You could plant seeds of hatred in people's heart, okay, that will fester and grow. And remember what ChatGPT's refutation of the Bible was. He said, the ChatGPT says, well, in that option number one only works in a perfect world, but in an imperfect world, you got to prepare for that as well. That's exactly what all the scholars and academics are saying here. That listen, this book planted hatred for us Jewish people. That's undeniable. It made people feel hate toward Jewish people, and therefore it caused them to do the deeds which they did. That's what all the academic scholars and historians say. So you cannot.
That's a generalizational fallacy. I mean, it really is.
I'm quoting. No. You can debate with the scholars. I'm quoting Yad Vashem these are the scholars of Yad Vashem in Israel. They have cited Christian anti-Judaism, specifically going down to the video, it pointing to 1 Thessalonians. What was it? Chapter 2, whatever. I forgot the number. That's in all of the references. Thessalonians. See, the thing is this. It states here, the scholars say the Jews accused of deicide. Jewish belief. The Jews were accused of deicide, the killing of God. This is one of the roots of Nazism. They're not going to, where the scholars stop is they're not going to say, look, it's 1 Thessalonians. But we know it's 1 Thessalonians. Okay, the thing is this: if this was really from God, what you have, he would have known, hey, boy, I better not write these hateful things, in this book, because idiots are going to pick this up and they're going to do stupid things. The Bible is not telling people to go out and kill Jesus or to kill Jews. What the Bible do, it creates the conditions for this stuff to happen. That's what all of academics and scholars agree on. No academic or scholar who have studied this issue is going to disagree. It's unanimous. The Bible created the. I'll add that to my notes.
Okay.
Crucifixion story incites hate. It's an evil story, and it created the conditions for evil to take place. Okay. Now,
so if we're to apply the same standard that you're applying to Christianity in the New Testament, in the Quran, Surah 9:5.
Oh, beautiful.
When forbidden months are past, fight and slay the pagans whenever you find them, seize them, and then lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. But if they repent, establish regular prayers, and pay zakat for the poor Jew, off of the way for them. Anyways, but we see that there is a prescription of an actually inciting violence. Christianity does not incite violence or call for violence. In the New Testament, there is not any verse that calls for direct violent
create
act
the
against
conditions.
Okay, but there's a distinct difference between the Quranic literature, which clearly states, and this is from Allah himself,
Okay.
and it says that you're called to slay the pagans.
Thank you
Okay,
for
and
sharing
that's
that.
again,
That's
I'm just saying.
beautiful. You've
Okay,
proved
but
Islam is true. Did you not read it?
The New
Let
Testament.
me explain. I'll explain. Let me give you my explanation. First of all, what is undeniable, as all academics and scholars agree, this book is responsible for the 2,000 years of suffering of the Jewish people, not the Quran.
Okay,
So now
may
let's go to chapter 9. I love that you pointed out. Remember what happened with Aisha? With Aisha came really evidence that the Quran is from God. Okay, now you go to chapter 9:5, and guess what we're going to find? What we are going to find is more. Not only is it, we are going to find not only that there's no problem here, but we will find more evidence that this is from God. Here, let me quote the verse in its context, and let's take a look here. Okay. And
while you're doing that, if I may, I will say that when we talk about again, that's a sweeping generalization fallacy, saying that scholars unanimously agree that that passage of scripture or the New Testament led to the Holocaust, because that is not true.
Okay. I have already shown you the reference.
That again, that just because you show me one or two references does not mean, in a poll from a news source like NBC and Fox, that is not scholarly sources.
Okay, let's go to scholar. I got more. If you need more, I got more. If you're still not convinced, you can do your research on that, and what you'll find, nobody will disagree. Okay, no one will disagree. It's consensus. All right. If you could show me one person who disagrees, I will be happy to entertain that. So what you want to do, you want to Google Holocaust scholars and talk to them about this belief about Jews killing Jesus, and say, no, this had nothing to do with the Holocaust. If you could show me that, I'll accept.
Okay, please continue with yeah. Okay, I am gonna again, because we have used AI, I am typing in, is it true that there is scholarly consensus that 1 Thessalonians 2:14 incited or is responsible for the Holocaust? Because I just think that is a sweeping generalization fallacy, and
why don't you share your screen, if you could, just so we can look at it.
Sorry, I'm typing. Let me.
Oh, no problem. So you also have to feed more information to ChatGPT. You got to say the belief in deicide. That if you use the word deicide, the killing of God, it's going to be able to start doing all the math.
Okay, I forgot to put scholarly. It's very important. It's a sensitive question. Okay, we get through that. First Thessalonians breaks it down. Many scholars, including Jewish and Christian theologians, argue the passage is one of the most troubling. Right. So the deicide charge, broad condemnation, historical misuse. However, many scholars resist a direct causal link between the verse and the Holocaust. They offer shared nuanced interpretation. And again, just to show what I'm talking about here, the very first thing I cited was, you said, is it true that New Testament is false for the Holocaust? That's what was said. And it went through here. And that was, in conclusion, there's strong historical argument. Certain New Testament interpretations, subsequent Christian anti-Judaism contributed to a long history. I agree with that. Was Hitler a Christian? And it said it's not a simple yes or no, but he obviously viewed it as weak, flabby. How do you feel about Islam? And it goes down. It says he thought it was manly, as a strategic tool, and it was, yeah, talk about that, and head toward one of, it's not real, genuine religious admiration, but rather one of cynical opportunism. So what Quranic verse incites violence? Because I was just looking at that because I knew that I couldn't remember where it was at specifically. Then we get into, is it true that the scholarly consensus, 1 Thessalonians 2:4, I was misspelled, incites or is responsible for the Holocaust? And again, however, many scholars resist a direct causal link between this verse and the Holocaust. They are often a more nuanced interpretation. So there is no scholarly consensus. Even AI says that. And so if it pulls, and again, I'm not appealing to AI as authoritative, because it's not. But to say that there's a scholarly consensus, at least AI can pull and say, no, there's not. So it is not true that there's a scholarly consensus that, again, as we said, that 1 Thessalonians 2:14-16 is responsible for the Holocaust.
So you're saying it's not a consensus, but some may disagree.
Okay, again, as it says, there is no scholarly consensus that 1 Thessalonians 2:14-16 is responsible for the Holocaust in a direct causal sense. The Holocaust was a modern, radically motivated genocide perpetuated by the Nazi state, not by religious mandated act. However, there's a strong, widespread scholarly agreement that historical misrepresentation and misuse of this faith fostered deep-seated tradition of Christian anti-Judaism. So yes, I concede that that verse has been used by those who claim Christ but are not biblical historical Christian.
Let me share my screen here real quick, okay? Let me put up ChatGPT here real quick. Okay, so a lot of the scholars reject the charge of deicide, is what I'm seeing. There's a lot of people. So this is where there's confusion. The people who are rejecting this, they're saying, no, the Bible, doesn't teach this. But let me just pull up a little chat GPT here, just so I can make it more clear. Ask chat GPT. Share. But also, one question is, should we really be limiting just to the Holocaust, or versus 2,000 years of persecution, as what we saw from the references? That's really the question here. Persecution of Jews. So let's do this. Scholars state that the belief the Jews killed Jesus. Jesus is responsible for Jewish suffering. Are there any scholars who disagree? Who disagree? You can see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Oh, you hit your limit. Please try again. Okay, scholars who state that. So I'm no longer able. Let me log in real quick. Oh, let me stop sharing my screen here. Let me try logging in with my account here. I'll have to steal my wife's account. Log in. ChatGPT. Crap. Okay. Okay. Let me share my screen. Share screen. Okay. Scholars state that the belief Jews killed Jesus is responsible for Jewish suffering. Are there any scholars who disagree? Okay. Let me just see what are there any scholars? Yes. There are scholars who challenge the nuance and this direct cause and the nuance who challenge or nuance this direct causation in various ways. Some argue that while the belief contributed to anti-Semitism, Jewish suffering has many causes. So they're saying it's just one of the many causes.
Right. It's a multifaceted issue.
A few scholars critique the narrative that placed a primarily blame on the Jews killed Jesus as the main or sole driving, So there's some who are saying it's just not the main. Most scholars agree that Jews killed Jesus belief fueled anti-Semitism, contributing to Jewish suffering. Some
I don't
scholars
disagree with that.
disagree or argue for a more complex. So there's really no major scholar consensus denies the charge that had harmful consequences. Okay. But debate exists about the extent and nature of the role. So that's my point here.
Right. And but again, the statement Jews killed Jesus was not the initial thing that you stated. You said that Second Thessalonians 2:14 was the verse that was responsible for the Holocaust.
Yes, that's true.
And
That's the
so
same thing.
that is not, again, there is not that is not, again, there's not a consensus. And again, you also said it was unanimous, or that it was all scholars hold to that. And so
Well,
what I'm trying to say is that's a
well, let's-
generalizational fallacy,
Well, let's
or
do
like a
this.
sweeping generalizational fallacy.
Are there any Holocaust scholars who disagree that the belief Are there any Holocaust scholars who disagree played a role laid an important cultural and religious groundwork that contributed to the anti-Semitic environment in Europe, which in turn made the Holocaust possible? Are there any scholars who disagree? Explicit, outright rejection is very rare. However, some scholars emphasize that the Holocaust was primarily racial, modern, and ideological genocide driven by Nazi ideology rather than solely. So what they're here, I think it's just downplaying the importance, not saying it was not at all involved, but some. So I think I'm standing on good grounds by my statement. Acknowledge religious anti-Semitism's role, but stresses a unique racial. So there is a dispute in terms of its importance. No prominent Holocaust scholar denies that Christian anti-Semitism, including the belief that Christians killed Jesus, helped create an environment which anti-Semitism flourished. So yes, but now we see. My point is this: what is undeniable at this point? What is undeniable at this point is the crucifixion story in the Bible. It is an evil story. But now comes Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What did he say about this? Or I'm sorry, well, the Quran. The Quran denies that the Jews killed Jesus. So the Quran actually removed this horrible stigma away from the Jews. And we firmly believe that this belief, it is false. So this is why one of the many ways we say that Islam is a religion of peace, which, by the way, I still haven't got to chapter 9, verse 5. Let me do that real quick.
If
Let's
I
go to-
may,
yeah,
I would like to respond to one thing, and then if we need to respond to it again later, I
Sure.
do want to, before we end, I do want to talk about the claim of because I have Bart Ehrman's book, Lost Scriptures, about, and it's talking about the validity of, I mean, this contains apocryphal literature of the New Testament, but it also talks about some of the original source, like the Mortorian fragment, which is really important in Christendom. But I also have writings of the early church fathers that I want to talk about as well. But all that to say, I do not, again, I want to conclude this point. We'll go on to verse 9 or chapter 9, verse 5. I don't disagree that New Testament misinterpretations have have been used to incite and as a means, as a tool against those outside of Christendom. I think the same thing, if we are consistent, I think the same thing across history. Islam, there are those that say that they belong to the Muslim faith, use Quranic misinterpretations or even just explicit teaching, and they twist it for their own means and actually have incited violence and perpetuated untold numbers of atrocities. So I don't think it is fair to say that of the New Testament without also holding the same kind of standard to the Quran and Islam.
There's no issue of, and I want to hold the same standard to Islam, because if Islam causes tragedy, violence, and senseless death or anything like that, then it should be rejected as well.
Okay,
Because
so
a true
beheadings of
religion of
Christians
God,
or beheading of other Muslims in Muslim
if Islam
countries
promotes that, then it should be rejected.
Okay, but I'm just saying, but would you agree with me that there are people that bear the name of Islam and commit atrocities in its name based on their understanding of the Quran? Is that true?
No.
Yes or no?
It's
No.
false.
No. So ISIL and ISIS and Boko Haram, those are all groups that bear the name of Islam and Muhammad, and they are committing absolute atrocities against other Muslims and Christians and innocent life. So they're not doing anything wrong.
A powerful tool. No, what I'm saying is, if you look at those people, they don't actually, when they commit these atrocities, they do not state, look, the Quran is teaching us to kill these people. They don't make the statement. No.
They don't. So they're not using, okay, so that brings us to 9.5. So they're not using the Quran then. What are they using? What is their foundation?
Like, for example, like with ISIS, what happened with ISIS was, it's very complicated with how ISIS originated. In fact, here, let's do this. Let's Google this. Let me show you. Why should we just, there's so much research and academic papers written on this topic. Why should I give my opinion or my understanding? Let's get to the references without further ado, because that's what I base my beliefs on, is academic scholarship. A lot of people started researching these claims that Islam is promoting violence, especially after September 11th. A ton of research has been done on this topic. Let me go there real quick. Let me share my screen, and let's go to the Google topic, which is what motivates So we have a lot of these research papers. Psychology of terrorism. This is very good. What motivates terror? What you're going to find from all of these research papers, the Quran, Surah 9:5, is nowhere to be found in any of this. Now, this is a lot, okay? No terrorist has ever, here's a good, what motivates people to join the terrorist organization like ISIS? So this is where probably your homework should begin. And what you are going to find is chapter 9, verse 5, or any verse of the Quran is not a driving factor in any of this. Okay? So I have read this stuff. That's what I'm basing my belief on. But let's go to chapter 9, verse 5 real quick. Because it actually proves once again that the Quran is from God. Let's go to chapter Surah 9, I'm sorry. Okay. Before all you got, I mean, if you just take 9:5, you take a pair of scissors, you cut it out, and you look at that one verse,
And,
It can look very terroristic. But let's start with
and that's the same issue
reading.
that's the same issue with 1 Thessalonians 2 or
No,
even Galatians 5. It's the same
that's a
issue.
different issue. The
Oh
issue
no, that's
of
entirely the same issue of contextual understanding.
you're not understanding what Thessalonians is doing. It creates anger in somebody.
But
It
so
incites hatred.
when Paul says don't repay evil for evil, so you're
But
saying that
in
like
an
if
imperfect world, that's not going to happen. People are going to get angry. People are going to be incited with hate and animosity. And when they see the dangling body of Jesus nailed to a cross, and they look at that, they're like, these are the type of emotions which will naturally happen. You're like, who did this? Who could be so evil as to do this to my Lord? And then the Jews will come to their mind. Those Jews did this. And you're going to start thinking about this. What is in those people that could do this? You know,
so
and
again,
it leads people down this tangent, and that's what causes the hatred. And
well, and I would say the same thing with Surah 9, I would imagine, because again, if I look contextually, and we will,
any reference for that.
Let's show me the reference for what? I'm trying to go back to 1 Thessalonians 5, saying that when it says
nobody
that
has ever been hurt by chapter 9, verse 5. No scholars show this verse and say, look, people are reading this verse and they're killing people. That's not happening.
Okay. I mean, please, I would like to, let's look at it. Please.
Let's read it. Let's start with verse 4. As for the polytheists who have honored every terms of their treaty with you and have not supported anybody against you, honor your treaty with them until the end of the term. So what 9:4 starts doing, it's sifting out the innocent people. Don't just kill everybody. Look at these people right here. And then comes 9:5, which you quoted. Now comes 9:6. And if any of the polytheists ask you for your protection, grant it to them so that they may hear the word of God, and then escort them to a place of safety. So on the battlefield, they used to do this. They used to say, I seek your protection. And then they would not kill that person, and they would escort them to a place of safety. For example, I'll give you a very famous story about this verse. Sarah, one of the satirical singers of Ibn Khattal, her name was Sarah. She, when the conquest of Mecca happened and the Islam took over Mecca, the Prophet said, Antum tulaka, to all you people, you are forgiven. And because they were afraid that, oh my God, now that you got the upper hand on us, we persecuted you, we did terrible things to you. Now it's payback time. So they said, what will you do to us? That's what the polytheists were saying. He said, to all of you, you are all forgiven. Go. Except Sarah, one of the satirical singers of Ibn Khattal. He used to sing satirical poetry against the Prophet of Islam. Ibn Khattal was killed. Ibn Khattal, and there was another woman, I forgot. Her name is Sarah, right? Ibn Khattal. I think her name is Sarah. I keep forgetting her name. Let me Google her. Ibn Khattal, satirical singer. Her name is Sarah, I think. So Ibn Khattal was actually killed. The two singing girls. Here we go. Coming from an anti-Islamic website, but hey, there was Farhana. She was killed, but then there was the other one. Now it sounds violent, but let's keep going. Here, singer. I have to go to the anti-Islamic websites to jog my memory. I think her name was Sarah. Sarah, or what's? Her name was Sarah. Here we go. I know what I'm talking about. Okay. Sarah knew about chapter 9, verse 6. Rather than running for her lives, Ibn Khattal was killed. Fartana, I think her name was Fartana. She was killed. You would run for your lives, or you would hang in, at least you would leave this, you do something to hide. She didn't. She said, I seek your protection, Muhammad. And Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, immediately granted her protection. Why? Because God said inside chapter 9, verse 6, if any of the polytheists ask you for protection, grant them protection. so that they can hear the word of God. And she outlived the Prophet of Islam. But then the story ended on a sour note where what happened, she actually did die. She was murdered. After the death of the Prophet of Islam, some people saw Sarah and they said, hey, isn't that Sarah? And they trampled her to death. But that was not allowed. During the life of the Prophet of Islam, she was granted protection. So this is the type of godly teachings that we are talking about. That, look, you don't just kill everybody. If any of the non-believers or people like that want protection from you, save them, protect them, and let them live a happy life like Sarah did. So actually, these are my point is this. Verses like 9:6, it doesn't belong in the 7th century. People in the 7th century didn't give a damn about innocent people or what we call non-combatants. There is no book which I know of which even shows the least bit of concern for innocent people or innocent bystanders or non-combatants until at least the last 100 years. So my point is this: these are extraterrestrial teachings, meaning that does not represent what people believed and think in the 7th century. And that is consistent with the word of God, that only a God could have revealed something like this, because people like that didn't think like people back then didn't think like this. So this is actually a beautiful example of why the Quran should be considered the religion of peace as well as the word of God.
Yeah, I appreciate your point, but I still go back to just even asking AI. Said, do groups like ISIS, ISIL, Boko Haram use the Quran as their source of authority? It says yes. Groups like ISIS, Boko Haram cite the Quran to lend legitimacy to their actions. Their interpretations are considered extreme and accurate outside the bounds of mainstream logic, like Islamic thought. And I agree that.
ISIS, okay, show me a reference where ISIS killed somebody and said this is based on chapter 9, verse 5, or any verse of the Quran. They don't.
Okay.
What they base their belief on from the Quran is the belief in caliphate, in the belief in Islamic laws. Yes, we all use the Quran for that purpose, but to really kill an innocent person and say the Quran taught me to do so, there is no such reference.
Again, asking the question. So if I could share my screen, please. Again, just I would like to dive deeper into actual academic research to do this, but again, for time's sake, I can't. But looking at, so I think I've shared my screen. Looking at Gemini, this thing started with. Hopefully, you can see my screen. So just starting with the question, do groups like ISIL, ISIS, Boko Haram use the Quran? And it says in summary. And then the next one, it says, has Surah 9:5 been used to incite violence against unbelievers? And in conclusion, while the verse has been and continues to be used by some to justify violence, this interpretation is seen by the majority of Muslims and scholars as a gross distortion of the Quran's message and betrayal of core principles of Islam. And I agree with that.
Used 9:5. That's wrong. Ask ChatGPT who has used verse 9:5 to kill innocent people. Ask ChatGPT that.
Okay, can you see my screen? Because I want to make sure that it's actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's nobody.
Who has used this passage to, what did I say?
Kill
incite violence.
People. No, not incite violence, to kill innocent people.
Okay. It says numerous. Justify. It's crucial to emphasize the usage is not a representative or mainstream Islamic belief. I agree with that. I agree with that.
There is no. You are misreading the information in front of you.
How am I misreading when it says it's
no. The only you can use chapter 9 verse 5 to fight against oppressors, people who are fighting you. We want innocent people. 9:5 has nothing to do with Yazidis. It cannot be used against that because those were the people who were taken as sex slaves. 9:5 has nothing to do with that. You got to give specific information. What you need to do is say, name the group and who was killed by 9:5. Give specific questions.
So, okay, I'll type that in, but I do want to go back to this in context. So 9 12 says, but if they violate their oaths after their covenant and taunt you for their faith, fight you, the chiefs of the unfaith,
Then
because
read
it means nothing to them. And then it says, again, down, it says, fight them. So there's this idea just to fight even people that are, okay, understand, there is a clear understanding that you will fight someone who has violated their oath, plotted to expel the messenger, and took aggressive lead. So there are three provisions there for which fighting others is permissible. And so if I were to resist Islam, if I were to resist the messenger, if I didn't incite violence, but I violated an oath, or again, I plotted to expel the messenger, if I said, I resist him, I don't want this, but if I'm not violent, there's still grounds that I could be taken and fought against based on this surah. So that's 12 through 14.
Oh, I'm sorry, one second. So, I'm sorry, I was just writing something. I was stuck on Surah 9:5. I was writing this. Has Surah 9:5 ever been used to kill an innocent person? Ever used to justify? Justify to kill an innocent? If so, give specific examples. So the Chat GPTs is making generalities. What I would ask you to do, let's go to the research papers. Let's go to the research which I showed you. What motivates terrorists? And show me any terrorist organization that used chapter 9, verse 5, or any verse of the Quran to justify the killing of innocent people. There is no such thing.
Okay, well, and I would ask a clarifying question. What do you define as innocent? Because if someone is not, so based on the Surah 9, verses 12 through 14, there are three means to commit violence against someone in this passage, in the context: those who have violated oaths, those who have plotted to expel the messenger, and those who have took the aggressive lead by being the first to assault. Okay, those are three things. And so obviously those three are not innocent.
Okay.
But how would you define innocence? Because if my existence of being a Christian and not willing to accept Islam, does that mean I'm not innocent? Does that mean that or if my daughter, as a Christian, she is a baptized Christian, and if she resists Islam, if she resists Muhammad, is she, just by her resisting, is she not innocent? Because that's what I'm saying, because there have been terror groups that have killed. So there have been brothers and sisters of mine in the faith that have been killed in front of their parents, children being beheaded in front of their parents.
Okay, so let's
because of groups, because these groups, because they are Christians teaching Christianity. That is what they're doing. They are not inciting violence. They are not breaking their oaths. They are existing. Or what about the Coptics in Egypt? What about the Coptic Christians existing, being burnt, like bombed and being killed in their churches, in their place of worship, by Islamic groups? Okay. That's my thing. What constitutes an innocence?
Okay, so yeah, so here's what we have here. All right. First of all, you should understand Christians are killing 10 times more Muslims than Muslims are killing Christians. Okay, look at the genocide taking place in Gaza. This is based.
Those aren't Christians; they're Jews.
Hold on, no, they are supported by evangelical Christians, and I'll even name you this. This guy's Fines? I forget the name of the senators. Even the senators and people in the Congress.
But who started it?
Cheering on Israel started it, cheering on the horrible genocide and mass murder of Muslim people. Randy Fines, there you go. That's his
I'm
name.
not familiar with them, but
They
okay.
are justifying the starvation, deliberate, intentional starvation of innocent people. So my point is this: look, Muslims and Christians are both killing each other. You are just looking at the evil acts of Muslim people. But let's get back to the issue. You asked me a fundamental
There-
question: what constitutes an innocent person? You know,
Yes. May
well,
I
first
say
of
this
all,
though? There are no
yeah,
Christian extremist groups that are going and systematically killing Christians.
the Christians
They're
are the
not.
greatest evil people who are committing a genocide in Gaza. The Christians started the Iraq war. The Christians started the Afghanistan war. They've killed millions of people. There's no comparison between the evil terror of Christianity versus these jihadist groups. Okay, we have a
If
genocide
you're
taking place in Gaza. But let
if
me
you're
go.
conf-
But
okay,
let's
that's fine.
stop this. Let's stop this discussion on what Muslims and Christians are doing. That's ridiculous. That's the issue. Is what do the scriptures teach? Because it doesn't matter how many Christians, commit these evil acts. What matters is what the scriptures teach, and, you could show a million. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. There was a time when Christians believed that black people were inferior because they were the seed of Ham. Well, guess what? That's not what the Bible teaches, and it doesn't matter how many
That was a
Christians do this.
minority view, but yes, and that's also
It doesn't
it's
matter. What we know is the Bible doesn't teach this. Therefore,
correct.
Christianity is innocent. Apply the same logic now to Islam. Let's go straight to the scriptures and let's see what the scriptures teach. Now, you ask me what constitutes an innocent person. Well, I would say this. Look, if I could show you a satisfactory definition, which doesn't exist in any other book, okay, it would prove that this is from God, because the Bhagavad Gita, the New Testament, the Old Testament, even the what's it called, Sun Tzu, his Art of War,
Uh,
no book was sophisticated enough to really give a good definition of what an innocent person is on the battlefield, because these ideas, these concepts didn't exist back then. Nobody cared. So if I could show you something like this in the Quran, this means this is not something from the 7th century, because people didn't care about these things back then. When you talk about not killing innocent people, that is something which we've only recently have evolved to appreciate and discover. So if something like this existed in the Quran, would you then agree that this, to your satisfaction, that this is an evidence that this book is from God?
I can't, because my understanding of God and even what the New Testament teaches is to live at peace with all people. So I can't
No, no.
expect just warfare theory that was perpetuated by Augustine as a
All
Christian
religions,
doctrine is
all
wrong.
religions teach peace, okay? No, but what we are talking about is on the battlefield, you're fighting wars, and so you should not just carpet bomb and kill innocent people. But to get to that level of sophistication, that is not found in any religious scripture.
Again, I go back to the question: what constitutes? So if what does it mean? Because I'm trying to look at the context, right? I'm trying to look at 9:12. If they violate their oath, I understand. Okay, you made a covenant, you violate a treaty. Okay, so if I had a treaty, if I was the leader, let's say that there's the Tyler Birdites, right? The Birdites had a treaty with Nadir's people, right? And we violated that. Okay, there's cause for just warfare there, correct? Based on this teaching, right? Okay. However, what about those that are trying to expel the messenger? So the thing is, if I said, I don't want this in my country, but I'm not violent, I'm just saying we're just going to defend against it, we don't want it. Does that mean that you have the right as a Muslim
I will
to
show it
wage
to you.
war against me?
You're not understanding me. I said I
Okay.
will show you it. I will satisfy your doubts here.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, if I'm successfully able to do that, then this is an evidence that this Quran is from God, because these cannot be the teachings of a person in the 7th century, because these type of concepts and ideas and your concerns was a lack of concern for them. Okay. Back then, nobody gave a damn about these things you're talking about. These are things which we have only recently have come to know and appreciate. So without further ado, let us see if Islam really goes into detail and defines what an innocent person is on the battlefield, and get the army soldiers to engage in good moral behavior. Let us go to chapter 4, verse 91. Actually, let's start with verse 80, 90. Actually, 91. Yeah, let's go to 91 here. You will find others who wish to be safe from you and their own people. Yet they cannot resist the temptation of disbelief. Oh, this is in parentheses of disbelief and hostility. If there's three conditions here, this is called a spot check. If they do not keep away, nor offer you peace, or refrain from attacking you, these are three conditions, then seize them and kill them wherever you find them. We have given you full permission over such people. So this on the battlefield, when you're fighting, these are the three conditions that you are supposed to be following. If they do not keep away, all right, they're moving forward towards you, offer you peace, or refrain from attacking you. So therefore, with anybody, any Muslim soldier, basically seeing a child, or let's say there's homes and neighborhoods, no, you cannot just go in there and start massacring people based on chapter 91, chapter 4, verse 91. And it repeats again, except though it says inside chapter 80, let's go to chapter 89, because it repeats it again and again. They wish you would disbelieve as they have disbelieved, so you all may be alike. So do not take them as allies unless they immigrate for the cause of Allah. But if they turn away, then seize them and kill them wherever you find them, and do not take any of them as helpers. And the verse continues, except those who are allies of people you are bound with in a treaty, and or who wholeheartedly, or those who wholeheartedly opposed to fighting you or their own people. And then chapter 91 comes in this midst of this battle, and it continues and say, listen, here's your three conditions. This is not something from the 7th century. That's my point. This can only come from a merciful, intelligent, loving God. So there you go. This is not only defines innocent people, and there's more passages like this inside the Hadith where it goes on and gives specific details that you don't fight, innocent people. So there you go. Every point you're raising, whether it be Aisha, whether it be chapter 9, verse 5, whether it be what, you will find evidence that Islam is from God. And I have yet to hear one evidence for Christianity. There is none.
So, I appreciate your presentation, and again, I would agree with you that the Quran does give, more than other books, definite clear boundaries for a Muslim version of warfare. But I still struggle to find where it is peaceable, especially towards people that don't agree.
Oh,
So again, talking about innocence, when we talk about this, so in Surah 5, which I know I don't mean to just be jumping all over the place, but I'm trying to look for understanding here. In Surah 5, it talks about the Jews and the Christians, and it talks about it really just talks about resisting them. I struggle because there's the idea of, again, it goes into war. So my question is, when there are Christians that are not inciting violence or warfare against Muslims, how should they be treated? Because here it just talks about warfare. And I know there are Christians that don't incite violence or do not wage war against Muslims. But here it seems like there is a level from this surah, like it definitely teaches that they will be punished by Allah. They'll be destroyed by Allah because they are not accepting him. They're not accepting Muhammad as the prophet. So they're not repenting. But
that's misunderstanding. So I think your question is, what do you do with people who reject Islam? They say, we don't accept Islam. We want to just basically follow our own religion, I think is what you're saying.
Right.
This is chapter 18, verse 29.
Okay.
And say, this is the truth from your Lord. Whosoever wills, let them believe, and whosoever wills, let them disbelieve. Now, I will give you a powerful historical example. Look what's going on in today's time. You know, look at when Islam conquered Jerusalem. Google keyword search. This will show you how Islam treats the Jews and the Christians. Okay, all you got to do, type Omar, conquest of Jerusalem, Jews. Okay. Read the story to show you. Omar was a Sahaba, meaning he was a companion of the Prophet of Islam. He was sent to conquer Jerusalem. So this guy, the Christian patriarch, Sophronius, and him were walking and talking. Okay. And Omar said, how come there's no Jews in Jerusalem? And he said, Sophronius said, we got rid of them. He says, no, bring them back. And why are there Jews today that say we're indigenous? It's because of Omar. Omar brought back the Jews. They say, no, basically the concept of Islam is that we all live as one community under Islamic Sharia law. So Omar brought back the Jewish people. Let's see if the story goes into that. Blah, 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 blah. Show more. The Jewish return, yeah. Following the conquest, the Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem and settle after the long period of being prohibited from living in the city by the Romans and basically the Christians. So this shows you the peaceful nature of Islam towards non-believers. Now, why is this? Now, how should they live under the Islamic rule? Let's go to Quran, chapter 15, verse 3. This tells you how they should live.
Is this the jizya, or is this?
Let them eat and enjoy themselves, and be diverted with their false hope of salvation or whatever it is. For they will soon know. Let's read full. So they are going to be punished by God, no doubt, in the next life. But in this life, let them eat and enjoy themselves. And what we as Muslims believe, the Jews and the Christians, they are to prosper and live happily. I will give you an example. The Jewish people. On the very deathbed of Prophet Muhammad, if I can find it, supported Jewish businesses is my point. I'll find you the reference. On his deathbed, Muhammad was paying rent for his sword and was it shield or sword? I can't remember. To a Jewish person. Now, on my deathbed, I would not care who I owe money to. I'm dying, right. But Prophet Muhammad made sure to support Jewish businesses and, of course, pay whatever he has to offer whatever he owes to this Jewish businessman, rather than burning down their businesses and kicking them out or whatever. And no, he was supporting because this idea of chapter 15, verse 3, leave them to eat and enjoy life under the Islamic Empire. And they did. The Jews and the Christians prospered in the Islamic Empire. Let's go ahead and Google that one. It's called it's called the Golden Age of Judaism.
May I ask, is this also, but they were subjugated because they actually had to pay the jizya, correct? They had to be, okay, got to pay the tax.
You got to pay the tax. Yeah, got to pay taxes.
Okay. Now, if they didn't pay the tax, were they expelled?
Well, so now you're saying, what if they don't pay taxes, right?
Yeah, if they don't submit to the taxation, are they expelled, or are they?
So there is a hadith about that. Let me find it. So let's say the Jews, they're given three options. Do you want to become a Muslim? They say no. Okay, so then will you pay the jizya tax? They say no, we're not going to pay the tax at all. So that actually did occur one time. And let me find the hadith on that. Okay, so they're being very stubborn. So let me see if I can find that. Let me see 1 second. Jizya, blah, 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 blah. Oh, here we go. Yeah, let me share the screen. Okay, here we go. So when you lay siege to the fort and besiege, and the besieged people appeal to you for your protection in the name of Allah and His Prophet, do not accord them the guarantee of Allah and His Prophet, but accord them your own guarantee. Oh, wait a second. What am I talking about? Let me read from the beginning. Okay. If they refuse to accept Islam, demand from them the jizya, which is a tax. Now,
Right.
here comes what if they agree to pay, accept it from them and withhold your hands.
Right.
If they refuse to pay the tax, seek help and fight them. When you lay siege to their forts and besiege up, and the innocent people now are coming out. So who are these besieged people? The people who refused to pay the tax. But they say, you know what? I still want your protection because of what God said inside chapter 9, verse 6. If any of the polytheists seek your protection, grant them protection. So now these people come out for protection. Then they say then it says, the besieged appeal to you for your protection in the name of Allah and His Prophet. Do not accord to them the guarantee of Allah and His Prophet, but accord to them your own guarantee and the guarantee of your companions. For it is a lesser sin that the security given by you and your companions be disregarded than that of the security of the granted in my name. Basically, so what he's saying over here is something goes wrong and these innocent people get hurt, do it under your name, don't do it under my name. So the issue of protecting the innocent people is such a big thing in Islam that the Prophet of Islam said, don't use my name. So that's how important it is to save the innocent people. And these are the people who didn't want to pay the jizya. So no, they are not killed. Rather, they are to be offered protection. And we saw in the case of Sarah, the satirical singer of Ibn Khattal, that she was granted a good life. And of course, it ended tragically in the end, but that's not what Islam teaches.
Okay, so, and I appreciate that clarification, but the three options were those who refuse Islam were you either submit, you accept Muhammad, you submit to the jizya, or are military forces taken against you.
Right.
And then if military force is taken against you, you have the right to make an appeal for protection. And at that point, they are no longer to be attacked.
Harmed. Yeah, they are not to be harmed in any way.
So the question that I would have, because biblically speaking, for a Christian, if I'm living in a Muslim controlled country, I would pay tax based on the governing authority. That's what I would do.
Sure.
I would seek to live at peace. However, I could not accept Muhammad. So that there's grounds there. But my question would be, because we do say, and this is in going back to Surah 5, that if we as Christians call Jesus the Son of God, if we call him, we believe that he is God, that is blasphemy. Is that a mashirk? And if someone commits mashirk, is that, I could be saying that wrong. Is it shirk or mashirk? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Shirk. Okay. So if I call Jesus God, so if I was one of those subjugated peoples, I submit to the jizya, but I refuse to denounce Christ, and I say that he is the Son of God, he is who I believe he is, he died on the cross, he is the only way to be reconciled to God, that is a shirk. Now, how is that punished?
Shirk is not punished from non-believers. Again,
it's not.
Yeah, no, not at all. The non-believers, people who believe in idols, people who do shirk and all that, they are actually a protected people under some. This is a special group of people called Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book. And they are to be granted protection and security. And what all the scholars agree, if we look at the historians and academics, all of them agree that religious freedom is a foundational truth in Islam. And Islam,
there's not compulsion.
I'm sorry, what's that?
So there's not compulsion based on the Quran. There's not a compulsion.
This is something which all the scholars and academics agree, that Islam never came to enforce or punish people for non-belief. We've already seen that inside chapter 9, verse 5. I'm sorry, chapter 18, verse 29. Just let them believe. Chapter 15, verse 3. Let them eat and enjoy this life. So these are talking about people like you. And that's how I live my life. I make sure that non-believers eat and enjoy and have a good life in this life. That's what we as Muslims are supposed to be doing.
So, and I appreciate your clarity on that, because that is what I have experienced from the majority of Muslims is nothing but kindness. However, the reality exists, going back to the problem at hand, is that people who claim the teachings of Christ and people who claim the teachings of Muhammad have used those teachings and twisted them to incite violence. And that is true of both Islam and Christianity.
No, I don't agree. I don't see anybody, whether past or present, has ever used the Quran to justify the killing of innocent people. I've never seen this example ever in history or even today. Nobody can open the Quran and say 9:5 teaches me to kill innocent people. That just has never happened.
And that would be a point that, again, I need to further research. But again, based on my own understanding and experience and things that I have seen, there are clearly people that are claiming to be followers of Muhammad and that uphold the Quran and slaying people just because they believe that they need to cleanse the land so where they can establish their own caliphate.
Yeah, where there is some problems, which I would agree with you, is the establishment of the caliphate, where people are engaging in violent acts to establish an Islamic state, which by the way, although that's true, if we go back to the original scriptures, those people were actually prophesized. Well, first of all, the Quran condemns it, but those people who do that, they are called Khawarij. Khawarij are a group of people in the history of Islam, which we won't get into today, but my point is this: not only were those people prophesied that they would come and do this behavior, but they were condemned. And that will be maybe a discussion we can have at a later time, because I know it's getting late right now.
Yeah, so I have two concluding things. I appreciate that, and I would say that it's comparable because even Jesus said there are going to be those that come to me in the last day that say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not do these things? He said, depart, I never knew you. So that's the same thing that I would say about the Holocaust. I would say about those that use the scripture and twist it, that Jesus will say to them, I never knew you, because he said to love your neighbor as yourself. And by committing the Holocaust is not loving your neighbor as yourself.
But the problem with Thessalonians, it created the conditions for this to happen. It incites hatred in people's hearts. So this is, you can't compare Thessalonians with Surah 9 verse 5. These are apples and oranges. I may not be able to compare it to Surah 9 verse 5. However, I can say that just as the claim is made that the New Testament has been used by extremists to wage warfare or commit acts of violence against other people, I could say the same thing about the Quran. And that's what I'm trying to say, or the Prophet Muhammad. That's what I would say, and that's where we could pick up at a later time. Show me a reference for that. But yeah, we gotta get going.
Okay, that's what I said, and this is where I want to conclude, because you said one last thing, if I may. Yeah. Sure, so you made claims about the gospel reliability, that there's no early sources, there's nothing like that. So Bart Ehrman himself mentions the Muratorian Fragment, which is a list of the canonical scriptures. So these are letters that are being circulated from the New Testament, and that Muratorian Fragment was in 180. So that's roughly 100 years after the life of the Apostle John. Okay, so that's 100 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just saying that, but also we look at the writings. So the New Testament writings can be compiled off of the writings of writers like Irenaeus. So Irenaeus wrote in about 180. We also have Tertullian, who's about 150 to 200. So based on his writings, we also have the Apostolic Fathers, which again, that's the first 300 years. And then we also have Justin, we have Polycarp, we have Clement of Rome and Alexandria, their writings. So the thing is, based on these writings alone, I could compile the New Testament. Not only that, but they also, because they are closest, okay, some of these guys were trained by the apostles themselves, and they cite that the gospel authors.
Let's talk about that next, but I gotta get going. Church fathers, they talk about, and
they cite Christ. This is the last thing I'll say. They cite that the gospel authors were indeed the gospel authors, and there are fragments, some of the earliest fragments that actually say kata, and then they'll say Mark or Matthew. And so kata means according to, so it's literally saying that it's in the text itself saying who wrote it, not being anonymous. So
let's do this. We'll talk about church fathers and Polycarp and all that at our next meeting. But I gotta get going. It's getting kind of late here.
I appreciate the time, and I really, if I can close this, I would just say that I would encourage anybody who's listening to this not to take my word for it, not to take your word for it, but to go and study. And again, like I told you, I need to go and study some of these points. More detail and more research, but I do appreciate the time, And yeah, thank you for this. And I actually think that the StreamYard actually is a pretty cool platform. So it worked pretty well, it seems. So thank you for your time, dear. I appreciate it.
All right, Tyler. I appreciate it. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.